3 years ago, when I was 19, I started my first year at a small private college studying graphic design. The program was small enough that by the end of orientation week, we'd all shared group critiques, awkward icebreakers, and way too much information. It felt more like a high school class than a college major. We learned names fast. Austin stood out right away because he was older, mid-20s, and carried himself like someone who'd already done a whole other life before starting over with us. He told everyone he'd served in the military and was using the GI Bill to get a second degree. At first, that made him seem kind of impressive and stable. He'd help people with Illustrator and Photoshop, lean over to troubleshoot, explain shortcuts, crack calm little jokes. The first few weeks he sat across the room by the windows with the guys who were into 3D. I noticed him but didn't think about him much beyond, "Oh, that's the ex-military guy." Then he started migrating across the room. One day he said the glare by the windows bothered him and moved a seat closer. Next class he said he needed an outlet and moved again. Within a week he was in the chair right next to mine like that was just where he belonged now. It was subtle enough that if I complained out loud I'd sound dramatic, but I noticed. He'd lean over my tablet, ask what brushes I used, compliment my layouts. On their own, the comments were fine. Put together, it felt like he was always in my space. During breaks, I'd go down to the campus cafe for coffee, and somehow he was always just heading there too. Sometimes he'd already be in line. If I stayed to eat, he'd sit across from me and start asking questions that were less, "What did you think of that project?" and more, "Where are you from? Do you live on campus? Do you have a boyfriend?" I kept my answers short because something about how focused he was on me made my stomach tighten. It didn't feel like casual small talk. It felt like he was trying to map out my life. One afternoon, it started pouring right as class ended. I was standing by the door scrolling my phone, pretending to text so I could wait a few minutes. Austin walked up with his backpack and said, "Hey, I'm parked right out front. I can give you a ride." I told him, "Thanks, but I'm good. I'm waiting for a friend." That wasn't true, but I didn't want to say, "I just don't want to be in your car." He didn't take the hint. He stayed there, blocking part of the doorway, going on about how he was headed that way anyway, and I'd be soaked by the time my friend showed up. He laughed and said, "Come on, I'm not a serial killer. I'm just trying to be nice." He kept repeating the offer like I'd eventually realize I was being silly. After a few minutes, I cut him off and said, a lot firmer, "No, really, I'm fine. Please go." His eyes flashed for a second, like he was annoyed. Then he forced a smile and said, "Suit yourself," and walked out into the rain. I felt weirdly guilty for saying no, but more relieved than anything. The next day, before class started, my classmate Taylor slid into the seat on my other side and whispered, "So, are you and Austin a thing?" I said, "No. Why?" She glanced over at him and said he'd been asking people what dorm I lived in, if I worked, if I was seeing anyone. Not once, either. Enough that other people had noticed. I felt my face get hot, not in a good way. I told her we weren't together and I barely knew him. She made this little yikes face and dropped it. But after that, I stopped answering anything personal he asked. If he steered the conversation toward my schedule, I'd redirect it back to class or just pack up and leave with someone else. About a week later, I was in the student library late, around 10, finishing a poster on one of the Big Macs. Our program usually cleared out by 6, and I knew Austin's classes ended in the afternoon, so I didn't expect to see him. When I got up to grab a book from the design section, I noticed him sitting at a table with a direct line of sight to my computer. No laptop, no textbook, just an empty table, and him staring my way. I tried to tell myself he was studying, and I just caught him mid-space out. But when I sat back down and glanced over again, he was still looking. No smile, no wave, just watching. After a few minutes of pretending to work while my shoulders were up around my ears, I saved everything, shut down, and packed my things. As I walked out, I texted my friend Cassidy. "Can you meet me at the dorm?" She said yes. I didn't look back to see if he followed. I badge tapped into my building, went straight up, and let Cassidy in on what had been happening. Saying it out loud made it feel less like I was being paranoid. The next night I closed at the cafe where I worked off campus and clocked out around 9. When I cut through the parking lot across from my dorm, I saw a dark blue Ford parked along the curb facing our front entrance. The headlights were off, but someone was in the driver's seat. As I got closer, I recognized the car from campus. Then I recognized his profile. Austin wasn't eating, on his phone, or talking to anyone. He was just staring at the dorm doors. I kept my eyes straight ahead, pretended I hadn't seen him, and walked past to the side path that led to the back door. I badge tapped in there instead. My hands were shaking a little on the scanner. Going up the stairs, I realized that was it for me. A classmate hanging around outside my dorm at night crossed a line I couldn't explain away anymore. The next morning, I emailed my program advisor, Dean Richardson, and asked if I could talk to her. In her office, I laid everything out. The seating thing, the coffee coincidences, the ride he wouldn't drop, Taylor's comment, the library, the car outside. She listened, took notes, asked specific questions. She told me the college took harassment seriously, and she'd be calling Austin in. Later that week, she told me they'd met. He denied stalking, said he was just being friendly, and maybe I'd misread things. She said she gave him a formal warning, went over the harassment policy, and told him he was not allowed to contact me or approach me outside of necessary classwork. For a few days, he actually stayed away. He moved back to the other side of the room and didn't say anything to me unless it was through a group project. I started to breathe again. Then the messages started. First, it was a long Facebook paragraph about how hurt he was, how he'd been blindsided, and just wanted to clear things up. When I didn't answer, he tried Instagram, then another account, telling me I was misunderstanding him, and he just wanted to be friends. I didn't respond to any of it. I screenshotted everything, showed Cassidy, and blocked him everywhere I thought he could reach me. A couple of quiet days went by. Cassidy and I walked out of the design building one afternoon, talking about a group project on our way to the bus stop by the library. The path wrapped around the back of the building. I remember hearing an extra set of footsteps fall in behind us, slow and steady, and when I glanced back over my shoulder, I saw Austin step out from behind the library and start walking behind us about 20 feet back. Cassidy didn't let it slide. She turned around, looked straight at him, and said loud enough for everyone nearby, "Austin, why are you following us?" He stopped, stared for a second like he was weighing something, then pivoted and walked away toward the parking lot without answering. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. After that day, it crossed from creepy to unbearable. I started planning every movement on campus around not running into him. If I saw his car in one lot, I used another. If I saw him in a hallway, I turned back. I checked reflections in windows to see if someone was behind me. Asked friends to walk with me even for short distances. It started to bleed into everything else. My sleep, my concentration, even how I answered normal questions in class. I was late on projects, forgetting small instructions, rereading the same emails because my brain kept going back to, is he outside right now? My anxiety got bad enough that I started having headaches and stomach pain before certain classes. About a month after my meeting with Dean Richardson, I realized nothing was improving, and I couldn't just keep waiting for him to get bored. I went to campus police, sat down in that cramped little office, and told the officer everything from the first ride offer to him walking behind us. They had me write a statement, asked for dates, times, screenshots, and the names of classmates who had seen him. The officers said they would forward it to city police since he lived off campus, and that what I described counted as stalking. Hearing that word from someone in uniform hit harder than when my friend said it. A few days later, they told me he had been given a formal stalking warning and that any more contact could mean charges. After that, I still saw him around campus a couple of times, but he stayed far away and never tried to talk to me. Eventually, his usual seat in class was just empty, and by the end of the semester, he had stopped showing up altogether. No one said anything official, but everyone was whispering that he'd been expelled for breaking the conduct code after the warning. I finished the semester, passed my classes, but the constant tension had worn me down to the point where campus no longer felt like a place to learn. When it was time to enroll for the next year, I looked at the forms and realized I could not stand 3 more years there. I applied to transfer to a different college in the neighboring town, even though it meant more rent, more loans, and starting over with new people. It was inconvenient and stressful, but staying where all of that had happened felt worse. So I left after that year and did not go back. Now, 3 years later, I know how badly it could have ended if I had kept trying to be polite. He never hit me or shouted, but the constant watching, the personal questions, the car outside my dorm were clear signs of an obsession, not harmless interest. I think about other women he might have treated the same way, and hope that the report, the warning, and whatever is on his record stopped him from escalating. The thing taught me to trust my instincts, set boundaries, keep accounts locked, and accept that the jump I feel around dark blue Fords and that watched feeling might never go away. The metallic scraping sound above my bed was what made me take off my headphones. I sat there for a second, staring at my laptop screen, thinking it was just the building settling. Then it came again, slow and uneven, like someone dragging something metal along the inside of a pipe. That's when I heard him clearly for the first time, a low male voice repeating something over and over from inside the vent. This was 2 nights ago, after my shift at the 24-hour supermarket where I work nights as a cashier. I rent a small studio on the 3rd floor of an old brick building downtown. 1 room, tiny bathroom, bed shoved under the only ceiling vent. I got home around 11:47, kicked off my shoes, opened my laptop to sort through work emails like I always do. The building was quiet in that heavy way it gets late on weeknights. I put on some music in my headphones while I answered messages from my manager. Even with the volume up, I kept catching this low murmur underneath everything, like a TV a few rooms away. At first I figured it was my upstairs neighbor on the phone or watching a movie with his window open. I've never heard anything through the floors before, but it was the only thing that made sense. The voice stayed constant, no pauses, no changes in tone, just this flat string of words I couldn't quite catch. Every so often I'd pause my music and sit very still. The voice would still be there, same volume, same rhythm. I remember actually walking to the window, opening it to check the street. Out there I heard distant cars and someone yelling way down the block, but the man's voice didn't get louder. If anything, it sounded clearer when I stepped back toward the middle of the room. I told myself, okay, whatever. Someone left a TV on. It's not my business. I'm usually the one who complains about people being noisy, so I forced myself to let it go. About 40 minutes passed like that. I finished the emails, closed my laptop, went to the bathroom to wash my face, trying to pretend everything was normal. When I came back out, I turned off the overhead light, left just my desk lamp on, and crawled into bed. I put on a true crime podcast in my headphones, more out of habit than anything, and lay on my side facing the wall. That's when the scraping started again. This time it was directly over my head, loud enough that the headboard actually vibrated. metal on metal, right above me. I paused the podcast, pulled the headphones off, and just stared up at the ceiling. The voice was louder now. I could tell it wasn't a conversation. It was the same sentence, exact same rhythm, over and over. The vent grate sits right above my headboard. Old square metal, paint flaking off. As I listened, it hit me that the sound wasn't coming from above the ceiling at all. It was coming straight down from that vent, from inside the shaft. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The thing is, the central ventilation in this building hasn't worked in years. Everyone uses window units and space heaters. The landlord made a point of telling me during the walkthrough, "These vents are dead. Don't worry about them. The shafts are supposed to just go straight up to the attic and end there. So there is no reason at all for a man's voice to be echoing down through one." That thought made my mouth go dry. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand, more out of reflex than any plan. For a few seconds I sat there thinking I could just put my headphones back on, blast the podcast, and ignore all of it. But the scraping started again, closer, and I realized that if this was an actual person, ignoring it would be the worst possible choice. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and pointed the beam at the vent. The voice kept going, same sentence, same tone. I still couldn't make out the exact words, but the cadence was stuck in my head. I hesitated, arguing with myself about whether to call someone first or check it out. Curiosity and the need to know what I was dealing with won. I walked to the kitchenette, grabbed one of the chairs, and dragged it over under the vent, trying not to look like I was avoiding standing directly underneath it. I climbed onto the chair carefully, one hand on the wall to steady myself, the other holding my phone up toward the grate. Up close, in the weak light, I could finally see the screws. Or rather, where the screws should have been. The two at the top were gone. There were just empty holes and a faint ring in the paint where the heads had been. The bottom fasteners were the only thing keeping the grate from swinging down. Someone had taken those top screws out from inside the shaft. My whole body went cold. For a second I thought my knees were going to give out, and I'd fall off the chair. I leaned in a little closer without meaning to, like I was trying to hear the words better. That's when the voice cut off mid-sentence. The sudden silence felt heavier than all the scraping had. I held my breath without realizing it. In that quiet, I heard heavy breathing and the rustle of clothing very close, just inches from the grate. I didn't think. I just jumped off the chair so fast it tipped and crashed behind me. I bolted to the front door, grabbed the baseball bat I keep there because of the recent thefts in the building, and spun back toward the vent. My hands were shaking so hard the bat slipped against my palm, but the idea of turning my back on that thing scared me more than going near it. I walked up under it and slammed the bat into the wall right below the grate. "Get the hell out of there! I'm calling the police!" I yelled, louder than I meant to. The hit rang through the room. For a second there was only that heavy breathing from inside the shaft. Then I heard a low laugh, right above me, like it was pressed against the metal. The voice came after, calm and clear now, like he'd dropped the act. "Madison from apartment 3B. I know your schedule." Hearing my full name and apartment number come out of that dark vent did something to me. He hadn't just stumbled across me. He knew exactly who I was, where I lived, when I came and went. My whole body went cold. The bat felt slick in my hand. Any idea of acting tough vanished. I turned and ran. I yanked my door open so hard it hit the stopper, and I didn't even bother to close it behind me. I started hammering on the nearest doors with my fist, still clutching the bat. "Someone's in my vent! Call the police!" I shouted over and over, voice cracking. For a few seconds nothing happened, and all I could see in my head was that grate swinging down and someone dropping into my apartment. Then the door to 3C opened and my elderly neighbor Mrs. K looked out in her robe, Her eyes went from my face to the bat to my open door. "What's going on?" she asked. I told her, stumbling over the words, that there was a man in the vents. He knew my name. He said, "Madison from 3B." She didn't argue or tell me I was imagining it. She just stepped back inside, grabbed her phone, and called 911 while I stood in the hallway shaking. A couple other doors opened. People peeked out, whispering, but nobody went near my apartment. I moved down toward the stairwell and pressed my back against the wall, keeping my eyes locked on my open doorway. I was sure at any second I'd see someone walk out. No one did. Those minutes before the police got there felt like they stretched forever, but I refused to step back into that room alone. When the officers arrived, 2 of them went straight to the attic access at the end of the hall, and 1 stayed with us. He took my name and number and asked me to repeat exactly what I'd heard. I kept coming back to the same thing. He knew my schedule. He knew my schedule. After a while, the other officers came back down. They said the attic hatch had been forced open, and there were fresh footprints in the dust leading across the attic to the roof emergency exit. Whoever it was had already gone. They told me someone had definitely broken into the ventilation system through the attic and had been using it to look down into apartments through the vents. One of the officers said whoever it was had probably watched long enough to learn people's routines. They recommended I change my locks, install cameras, and not sleep there alone until the landlord secured the building. Nobody tried to brush it off or say it was just a prank. That same night, as soon as they cleared my unit, I went back in with Mrs. K standing in the doorway and started throwing clothes into bags. I grabbed my laptop, documents, toiletries, anything that felt important. I refused to stand under the vent again. I left the main light on, locked the door, and went to stay with a friend across town. I didn't come back for a week. When I finally did, I brought a small crew of workers my friend's brother knew and made the landlord sign off on it. They went through my place and sealed every vent opening with thick metal plates and heavy screws. They did the same for a few other units on the floor. The whole time they were drilling and fastening, I kept catching myself staring at the ceiling, picturing him lying on the other side of that thin grate, listening to everything. But the worst part wasn't that someone had physically been in the shaft. I can understand that there are creeps who will crawl through dust and fiberglass for a chance to watch people. What really hit me later was realizing he'd probably been there for weeks, maybe longer, listening to my phone calls, learning my night shift pattern, paying attention to when I showered, when I slept, when I left my door unlocked for just a minute. It made every normal night I'd spent there feel dirty in hindsight. At the station, when I went back to give a full statement, an officer casually mentioned there had been 3 similar reports from tenants in my building in the last month. Scraping in vents, a man's voice, details about their lives that a stranger shouldn't know. No one had seen his face. No one had been caught. They said they were working on it, but it sounded like they had nothing solid. I moved out 2 months later, as soon as I could scrape together a deposit and find something halfway decent. My new place is smaller and not in a great area, but the heating is different, and there are no ceiling vents, just a wall unit. Everyone tells me I'm safer now, and I know they're probably right. But even in this new apartment, if I visit someone's house or stay in a hotel, if there's a vent grate above the bed, I still can't sleep under vent grates. I moved into a rented apartment on the 4th floor of a small residential complex in early April last year. I'd just gotten promoted to logistics manager and decided it was finally time to live alone without roommates. It felt like proof that I was actually an adult, not just pretending. The first month was boring in a good way. Work, cheap dinners, streaming shows, and falling asleep with my laptop open while the building settled around me. In early May, the weird stuff started, though at first, it just felt like a dumb joke. One Monday morning, I rushed down to the parking lot, balancing my coffee and keys, and saw a folded piece of paper under my windshield wiper. My stomach dropped because I thought it was some parking notice, but when I opened it, in very neat handwriting, it just said, "You chose the right place." I told myself some bored neighbor was trying to be cute, stuffed the note into my bag, and hurried off to deal with trucks and spreadsheets. I stood there for a second and looked around the lot. None of the other cars had notes, nobody was outside, and most windows were still dark. The words could have been friendly, but something about them felt off, so I crumpled the paper and tossed it in the trash by the stairs. About a week later, checking my mailbox in the lobby after work, I found a small black notebook sitting on top of my usual junk. I hadn't bought any notebooks recently, and there was no envelope or flyer with it, just that plain cover shoved in between bills. I took it upstairs with the rest of my mail and opened it at the kitchen table. Every page was blank except the first one, where someone had written, "We watched to keep you safe." The handwriting was the same style as the car note. I just stared at that line. We meant more than one person. Watch meant this was not random. I laughed once under my breath and told myself it was some lonely neighbor with a strange sense of humor, but I still shoved the notebook in my bag to show someone. The next morning, I asked the older guy from down the hall if he'd seen anyone near the mailboxes. He said no and looked confused. Later, I showed the notebook to the building manager. He frowned, called it creepy, and offered to install a camera. I told him not yet. I hated how paranoid I sounded even saying it out loud, so I smiled like it was nothing and changed the subject. For the next 3 weeks, nothing else happened. No more notes, no strange objects, nothing moved around in my place. I kept telling myself that was a good sign, that whoever it was had moved on. Work got busy with a new client, and my brain switched back to delivery times and angry emails. I honestly started to believe I'd overreacted. Then, at the very end of May, I came home a little after 7 and saw a silver SUV parked across from the entrance. A woman around 50 sat behind the wheel wearing big sunglasses and staring straight at my building door. I walked past like I hadn't noticed her, digging for my keys until I reached the door and swiped into the building. In the glass, I saw her head turn, following me. The next morning, the SUV was in the same spot, same woman, same sunglasses. My stomach clenched. I pulled my phone, snapped a photo of the plate, and texted it to Lena with, "If something happens to me." During the day, the SUV disappeared, but that evening it was back. The pattern continued for 2 weeks. Sometimes I saw her in the morning, sometimes at night, always sitting there and watching. I started changing my routes, different stores, different streets, hoping she'd vanish. Instead, I saw her at the grocery store near my place, standing by a shelf and staring across the aisles. I saw her again at a random gas station, filling her SUV and staring. This couldn't be coincidence anymore. I went to the police the next day after seeing her at the gas station. I sat across from a tired-looking officer and laid everything out. The note on my car, the notebook, the silver SUV, how she kept showing up in random places near me. He listened, typed some of it into the computer, then basically said there wasn't much they could do. No direct threats, no messages saying she wanted to hurt me, no proof she'd been in my apartment. He told me to document everything, keep a log, save photos, and if she ever crossed a line, followed me into the building, tried to talk to me, damaged my car, then we could talk about a restraining order. Walking back to my car, I felt stupid for even going, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling they were underreacting. She never approached me, never said a word, just watched. That somehow felt worse than someone yelling in my face. I started writing down every time I saw her. Date, time, place, what she was doing. The list got long fast and made it harder to tell myself this was all in my head. I got more careful with my routines, shifted my work schedule when I could, started using different routes and stores so I wouldn't be so predictable. For a while, it didn't help. I'd turn onto a side street and see that same silver SUV parked at the end. I'd leave work late and spot it rolling past the lot entrance. Sometimes I wasn't even sure it was her. I'd just catch a glimpse and my stomach would drop. My friends kept telling me I was spiraling. "Maybe she just lives nearby," one of them said. "You're noticing her now because you're looking for her." I wanted to believe that, but deep down it didn't match how fixed her attention felt. The night that changed their minds, we were at a small restaurant not far from my building. I picked it at the last minute, sent the address to my group chat, and went straight there from work. I didn't post anything online. We were eating when Lena suddenly went quiet and stared past me toward the window. She nudged my arm and whispered, "Is that her?" I turned, and there was the silver SUV at the curb, engine running, the woman in the driver's seat, sunglasses still on even though it was getting dark. She was turned toward the restaurant, not eating, not on her phone, just sitting there facing the glass. My other friend looked, and I saw both of their faces change. Nobody said I was paranoid after that. The escalation came at the end of June. I had a long client meeting and got home around 8 in the evening. The hallway was quiet. I unlocked my door like always, pushed it open, and stopped in the frame. The air smelled wrong, like a light floral perfume I'd never worn. It wasn't strong, but it was out of place enough that it hit me right away. I stayed frozen in the doorway, just listening. A second later, I heard a sound from my bedroom down the short hall. The soft slide of a dresser drawer opening and then bumping shut. I didn't think. I just reacted. I pulled the door closed again, turned around, and headed straight back toward the stairs. By the time I hit the first landing, I had my phone out and was calling 911, telling the dispatcher there was someone in my apartment right now, and I was not going back in alone. She told me to stay out, stay visible, and wait for officers. As soon as I hung up, I called my downstairs neighbor, Mark, the retired military guy who was always saying to call if I ever needed anything. He answered on the first ring, and as soon as I said, "There's someone in my place," I heard a chair scrape and him say, "Stay put, I'm coming up." He stepped out into the stairwell holding a beat-up baseball bat, and we waited near the entrance until the patrol car pulled up. 2 officers went up with us, guns drawn. I stayed in the hallway while they opened my door and cleared the living room and kitchen. Then one of them moved toward the bedroom, shouted for whoever was inside to keep their hands where he could see them, and stepped just enough to the side that I could see past him. Sitting on the edge of my bed was the same woman from the SUV, hands resting in her lap, a small handbag beside her like she'd just sat down to wait. She didn't resist when they handcuffed her, didn't shout, didn't even look surprised. She glanced at me once in the doorway, almost checking that I was really there, and then they walked her out past us. During the search afterward, they went through my drawers and closets, and in the pocket of one of my jackets they found a spare copy of my apartment key I'd never made. When they talked to the building manager later, it came out she had convinced him to give her a duplicate by saying she was my relative and I was stuck at work without my keys. He kept apologizing, saying she seemed calm and believable and he thought he was helping. But none of that changed the fact that she'd been in my home who knows how many times before that night. Later, during interrogation, the officers told me she was calm, polite, and very fixed on one idea. She kept repeating, "Our observer group must protect the chosen ones," over and over, and refused to explain what that meant or who else was in this group. A psychiatric evaluation said she was competent, but had obsessive ideas. That didn't make me feel safer. In court, she ended up with probation and mandatory treatment, not jail. I moved to a different place as soon as I could, switched buildings and neighborhoods, but it's been over a year now, and I still check the peephole twice before opening my door, still look over my shoulder when I walk to my car, still check the back seat before I get in. I never found out if this observer group actually exists, or if it was just one lonely woman's sick fantasy. And every time I notice an unfamiliar car sitting too long near my new building, my heart starts racing like I'm about to see that same silver SUV again. Way back last summer, my older sister Caitlin had a severe panic attack at work, and her former co-worker Brian drove her to an urgent care clinic in downtown Seattle. The attack scared everyone enough that the doctors kept her overnight for observation in this weird clinic that occupied a few floors of a 2-tower office complex. An old 80s tower and a newer glass one connected by a 3rd-floor walkway. Around 10 that night, she called and asked if I could bring her a change of clothes and a phone charger, her voice small and shaky as she apologized for making me drive downtown so late. I said of course, grabbed what she needed from her apartment, and met Brian out front, and he offered to ride with me since he said he knew the building better than anyone. The clinic was in the old tower, but when we got there, the whole front curb was jammed with cars and valets for some event next door, and there was absolutely nowhere to park legally. After one slow lap around the block, Brian muttered that this was stupid, said we would just park in the lot behind the new tower and walk through the connector bridge. And I agreed because Caitlin kept texting asking how close we were. Inside the new tower, the lobby was almost empty, just a security desk and a couple of people waiting for elevators. And Brian told me we simply had to go up to the 3rd level, cross the bridge into the old tower, then down 1 floor to find the clinic. On paper, that sounded so simple that we actually joked about how fast we would be in and out. But the second we stepped out on 3, nothing looked like what he remembered. There were no obvious signs for any bridge, just beige hallways and office doors with company names we did not recognize. So we circled once, got turned around almost immediately, and ended up back near the elevators. We swallowed our pride and went to the information desk, where the bored-looking security guard barely glanced at us before pointing down a hallway and telling us to go left at the next elevator bank and follow the small skybridge signs. 5 minutes later, we were staring at a locked conference center with no skybridge anywhere in sight, and Brian laughed under his breath and said he promised he had really worked there once, just not in this maze. A janitor came by pushing a big cart with earbuds in, and when Brian flagged him down, the guy pulled one earbud out, listened, then pointed us in almost the opposite direction and told us to go straight, then right, and look for a door marked connector. We followed that too, and somehow we still ended up in another anonymous hallway that did not look familiar at all. And by then, Caitlin was sending question mark texts, while I felt my patience slipping. Both of us are honestly terrible with directions in big buildings, so when we found a freight elevator tucked behind a service door, with old metal mesh inside instead of a solid wall, Brian shrugged and said we might as well try it. The panel claimed it stopped at the connector level, but when we rattled up and the doors rolled open, we were just at the far end of a corridor we already recognized from earlier. Same pictures on the walls and the same exit sign. We bailed on that and tried a regular elevator closer to the middle of the floor, guessing at which buttons belonged to which tower, and stepped out on yet another wrong level with dark windows and quiet closed offices instead of a clinic. On that panel, our only choices were the basement or the 5th floor, and Brian said the basement was probably mechanical rooms needing a key card, so he hit 5 and told me we would just try to work our way back across. The doors opened onto a long hallway where the main lights were off, and only the low emergency strips along the walls were on, and plastic covered parts of the carpet like someone had started work and then stopped. Nobody else seemed to be around, so we walked far enough to find another elevator bank, traded a tired look, and tried again to go down toward where we thought the bridge level should be. Instead, we landed on yet another wrong floor with a different panel that only offered the basement or the 7th floor, and after a second, Brian sighed, said basement would definitely be locked, and hit 7. When the doors opened this time, we stepped into an empty white corridor that clearly had not seen regular use in a long time, with old office partitions stacked along one wall, abandoned chairs, a plain stairwell door, and a pair of unmarked double doors at the far end. The second my foot hit that floor, I felt uncomfortable, not terrified exactly. Just like we had accidentally wandered into some forgotten part of the building where nobody was supposed to be. Then I realized we were not alone, because near a crooked desk in the middle of the hallway, a man and a woman were standing there in business clothes that looked a little out of date, like something from an old office photo. The man looked about mid-40s, bent over a spread of documents on the desk in a rumpled dress shirt and slacks, while the woman around the same age stood beside him in a knee-length skirt, arms loose at her sides, staring toward the wall instead of at us. Brian slowed, and I did too. Both of us just waiting for them to glance up, or at least react to the elevator. But the man kept his head down over the papers. The woman kept staring past us, and they did not react to our presence at all. Like they did not notice us. Brian said we should just find someone who actually worked there and started walking toward the far end of the hallway like the couple weren't even there. I watched him go and felt stuck, because I didn't want to stay alone by the elevator, but I also really didn't want to follow him deeper into that corridor. I was about to call him back when one of the office doors halfway down opened just enough for someone to slip through. A woman in a security uniform stepped out, but the colors and logo on it were completely different from the guards we'd seen downstairs. She looked straight at us and said, sharp and flat, "You should not be on this level." "Brian, come back," I called, meaning back to the elevator. But he was already heading toward her with his hands up a little, trying to look harmless. He started explaining that we were lost and trying to get to a clinic in the old tower, that my sister was there. She barely let him finish. In the same flat tone, she cut in with, "The highest button," gave a quick nod toward the elevator, and slipped back through the door, closing it firmly behind her. The latch sounded louder than it should have in that empty hallway. Brian came back frowning and asked if I'd seen what company name was on her badge. I told him no, just that her uniform didn't match the others. He shrugged and said maybe they used different contractors on different floors and that, at this point, we might as well do what she said since everything else had been wrong. We stepped into the elevator again and looked at the panel. The highest button on it was 7. Brian hit it, the doors shut, and a second later they opened on another 7th floor. This one looked totally different. Bright lights, clean carpet, glass-fronted offices, printed directories on the walls, phones ringing somewhere, printers going. It felt like a normal office level, which somehow made the dead quiet of the other hallway feel even stranger in my head. We were standing there trying to make sense of the wall map when another guard walked straight toward us, this time in the same uniform as the guy at the lobby desk. She didn't smile. "What are you doing up here?" she asked, in that tone that isn't really a question. Before we could give her a full answer, she glanced at the elevator we'd just come out of and said, "This is a restricted administrative area. You're not supposed to be on this level. You need to leave immediately." Brian jumped in, saying we were just trying to get to the clinic where my sister was staying, that we kept ending up on the wrong floors and people had given us bad directions. I nodded and pulled out the little visitor sticker they'd given me downstairs, like proof we weren't sneaking around on purpose. Her face shifted from annoyed to just tired, and she asked how we'd gotten into that elevator without a badge. Brian mentioned the other guard, the woman with the different uniform who told us the highest button. The new guard frowned at that and said that company hadn't handled security in the building for years. She looked like she wanted to argue with us about it, then seemed to decide it wasn't worth it. Instead, she just sighed, told us to follow her, and used her card to open an unmarked service door at the end of the hall. Behind it was a short back hallway and a plain service elevator. She said this one would take us to the public clinic level, rode down with us, and walked us out into a busy corridor with clear signs for labs and imaging, and finally, the urgent care. Only when she made sure we could literally see the clinic entrance did she peel off and go back to her post. By the time we reached Caitlin's room and handed over her clothes and charger, I'd shoved the whole weird detour to the edge of my mind so I didn't accidentally say something that would stress her out more. A few months later, when Caitlin had a follow-up in the same clinic during the day, I went with her again. While we were waiting for a nurse to come in, I ended up telling the story, including the couple in the hallway, the strange guard, all of it. The nurse laughed at first and said we must have mixed things up, because that floor doesn't exist, honey, and there was no abandoned 5th level in this building. When she realized we weren't joking, her face changed. She asked a couple of quick questions, then told us that 4 years earlier, there had been a fire on the 5th floor of the old tower, in an accounting firm. 2 employees hadn't made it out. After that, she said, the entire floor was closed for reconstruction, but the company went bankrupt. The work never really started, and as far as she knew, that level had been sealed and taken off all the normal access lists. Hearing that messed with me more than I expected. The 2 people we'd seen in that hallway looked like normal living people, just weirdly focused on their own work and completely ignoring us. Their clothes were a little outdated, but nothing crazy. Brian swears he never noticed them until I brought it up in the car later, and the nurse kept repeating that the fire floor is officially closed and nobody's supposed to get up there at all. I still don't know how we ended up on it, or if we really did. But now whenever I have to visit that office complex, I get this heavy feeling in my stomach, and I do everything I can not to go there alone. A woman offered me $3,000 cash to let her take my wife. This happened a month ago in the parking lot of the supermarket where I work as a night security guard, and I still can't get it out of my head. My wife Emily often picked me up after my night shift around 7 in the morning, and she always looked tired, hair in a ponytail, no makeup, big hoodie over her scrubs. People constantly mistook us for brother and sister because she's 23 but looks younger, and I'm 25 but look older. We'd only been married 6 months, still arguing about dishes and rent, and whether my night job was ruining our schedule. But let me go back to the beginning, because it didn't start with money. I've been on nights at this 24-hour supermarket for almost a year. The work is boring until it suddenly isn't. Most of my shift is watching cameras, walking the aisles, telling drunk guys they can't sleep in frozen foods. But there are moments that stick with you. Cars circling the lot a little too slowly, men standing just outside the light lines staring at whoever's walking alone. Security is technically my job, but no one pays me enough to feel comfortable about my wife sitting out there in the dark waiting for me. She started picking me up when my old car finally died for good, and we decided to live with one vehicle for a while. She'd work a full day at the dental clinic, go to her evening class twice a week, then get up early to drive over and get me. It wasn't ideal, but buses around here at that hour are a joke, and she didn't like the idea of me walking home half asleep. I kept telling her I'd call a taxi instead, but she said it felt safer if we were together for that weird early morning hour. That morning seemed normal. Around 6:50 I did my last walk, checked the back doors, signed the log. My brain was in that foggy place where you're awake but your thoughts keep drifting sideways. At 6:59 my phone buzzed. Here. On the camera by the entrance, I saw Emily's little car pull into the same spot she always used, right by the sliding doors under the tallest light pole. She parked there on purpose, said she didn't like the blind corners farther out. I clocked out at 7 on the dot and headed toward the doors, already thinking about the shower and the cheap cereal waiting at home. Through the glass, I could see Emily resting her forehead on the steering wheel for a second, then straightening up when she saw me. I pushed the cart gate aside, stepped into the air, and walked toward the car. An older woman detached herself from the wall near the entrance and came toward us just as I reached for the passenger door. I hadn't noticed her on the cameras, which bothered me in a small way. She looked like someone's aunt, maybe 50, normal clothes, neat hair, reusable shopping bag over her shoulder. She smiled like she was embarrassed to bother us. "Excuse me," she said, stopping a few feet from Emily's window. "Could you give me a ride to the bus stop? They changed the line and I'm still figuring it out." It was said politely, evenly. I opened my mouth to say we were in a hurry. We usually were. Emily needed every extra minute of sleep. But the woman's attention slid right past me and locked onto Emily. Her eyes did a quick scan. Face, hands, the bag of scrubs in the back seat, like she was checking a list. "Poor girl looks so exhausted," she said, almost gently. "Must be hard to work and study at the same time?" Emily actually frowned a little. Yeah, kind of," she said. "No name tag, no textbooks in sight." The guess was too accurate. The woman nodded, pleased. "And the guy who hired you," she asked. "Does he pay well? I could offer better conditions." For a second, I thought she meant a cleaning job, like she'd mistaken Emily for some kind of live-in helper. It happens. Emily looks young and quiet, and people assume things. I gave a small, tired laugh. "She's not looking for housekeeping work," I said. The woman ignored me completely. She took one step closer, close enough that I automatically shifted to put myself between her and the open edge of the door. There was nothing obviously threatening in her body language, but the way she watched Emily felt wrong, like she'd already decided something about her. Then she pulled out her wallet. She opened it calmly, right there in the middle of the parking lot, and started peeling out bills. $500 a week for cleaning and cooking," she said, eyes on Emily. "I have a big house. You'd even get your own room." Emily gave a confused half smile and shook her head. "I already have a job," she said, "and a place to live." $1,000 a week, the woman said immediately, like she'd rehearsed the number. She doubled the stack in her hand and held it up almost level with Emily's face, but not close enough to be technically touching her. "You're a smart girl. Do the math yourself. It's better than what you have now." People were going in and out of the store behind me. No one glanced over. To them, it probably looked like someone paying back a debt. Emily leaned back against her seat, putting distance between her and the cash. "I'm not interested," she said, more firmly this time. "Sorry." The woman's smile didn't move, but her eyes did. The warmth dropped out of them. What was left wasn't anger, just something flat and calculating. "You don't have to decide," she said. "He can decide for you." That's when I stepped in fully, my hand flat on Emily's door to keep it from being opened any farther. "She's my wife," I said. "We're not letting her go anywhere with you." The woman paused. For a second, I thought she'd get offended and walk off. Instead, her lips curved a little more. "Wife? So young?" she said. "Well, even better. Means she's already independent." She now addressed me directly, and this is where things got truly creepy. $2,000 a month, she said, like we were talking about some normal job. "She'll live at my place. I'll train her in everything necessary. You'll both win. You'll have more freedom, and she'll get an opportunity." Emily's hand slid into mine. I hadn't even noticed her moving it. Her fingers were cold and shaking. Her grip got tighter every time the woman said, "she," like Emily wasn't standing right there, like they were talking over her head. "We're not interested," I said. I kept my voice even on purpose. "Please step away from the car." The woman looked straight through me. Her eyes stayed on Emily. $3,000, she said. "Cash. Right now." She lifted the stack of bills higher so I couldn't ignore it. I could see the thickness of it now. That wasn't a little wad for show. That was rent, and a chunk of our debt, and part of the medical bill Emily still had from before we were married. My brain jumped there automatically, and I hated that I knew exactly what $3,000 could do for us. Emily whispered, "Can we go? Please." That cut through everything. I pulled my hand free, turned the key, and the engine started. I put the car in gear. While I was doing that, the woman moved around the front and grabbed the top of Emily's open window with one hand, holding on like she had a right to. "Think about it at least," she said. Now there was something harder in her voice, like she was getting annoyed. "I'll leave my card on the windshield. Young families always need money." Her fingers were white on the glass. Up close, I finally understood what bothered me about her eyes. Her face said friendly and polite. Her eyes were locked in, like she was watching something else that only she could see, and we were just part of it. "Let go," I said, louder this time. She held on for one more second, like she was testing whether I'd really move the car anyway. Then she dropped her hand, gave Emily one last slow look, and stepped back. "Door-to-door salesman, that's all," she said lightly. The tone didn't match the words. "You will call. I know you will." She walked in front of us and, like she'd promised, slid a plain white card under the wiper. Then she headed toward the far end of the lot like her car was parked there. I drove off without touching the card. We didn't speak the whole way home. Emily stared straight ahead, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to make less of a target. For the next 3 days, that same white card kept showing up under our wiper. Same cheap paper, same layout. No name, just a phone number and an address in one of the suburbs. We never saw who left them. I knew the first one was in our kitchen, on the counter, where I dropped it on a paper towel because I didn't want to hold it with my bare hand. After the second card, Emily stopped calling her that weird lady. She started checking the street from the window before we went out. When we parked anywhere, she asked me to back into spaces so the windshield faced a wall or a fence. It made sense, so I did it. I also started walking her to work every morning, even on days when I'd just finished a shift and my body wanted to fall over. The idea of Emily out there alone, with that woman looking for another girl, made it pretty easy to stay awake. A week after that first morning, I was at my post around 3. The store was almost empty. I was staring at the monitors, trying not to nod off, when she just appeared on the screen, walking in through the sliding doors with an empty basket on her arm. My stomach dropped. I watched her walk past the checkout without picking up a single thing. Her eyes flicked over the aisles once, then locked onto the security desk. She came straight toward me. "Haven't you decided yet?" she asked. Up close, she looked exactly the same. Same clothes, same neat hair, same practiced smile that stopped at her cheeks. "I'll raise the offer to 5,000. This is the last time. Then I'll find another girl." I stood up, putting the desk between us. "You need to leave," I said. I kept it professional. "You approached my wife in the parking lot. You've been leaving cards on our car. This is harassment." She shrugged. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. 5,000, regular payments, safe place. Do you know how many girls would be grateful?" I hit the intercom and called the manager, told him she was back and I wanted her trespassed. While I talked, she just watched my face, like she was taking notes on every word. My manager came out from the office, still half tucking in his shirt, and I went through the whole thing again in front of her. He listened, then looked at her. "Ma'am, I need you to leave," he said. "You're making my staff uncomfortable. You're now on our unwanted visitors list. If you come back, we're calling the police." She didn't argue. She set the empty basket down, turned, and walked toward the doors. Right before they opened, she glanced back at me. "Too bad," she said. "I could have made her happy." We haven't seen her since, but Emily still refuses to park on that side of the supermarket. And even now, when I sit at that security desk and watch the cameras, I catch myself studying every older woman who walks in alone, waiting to see if any of them look at someone the way she looked at my wife. Like a price tag is the only thing that matters. So when I was 24, I was renting a small studio in Austin for $1,200 a month, which was way too expensive for my barista salary. I worked at a coffee shop, and every rent day my balance dropped low enough to make me panic. Moving back in with my parents felt like giving up, so I decided to find a roommate. I posted a listing for a female roommate on a rental site and wrote that I worked early shifts, didn't party, and wanted someone quiet. Most of the replies were from guys ignoring the women-only part, or from people who already sounded like trouble. Then there was Mia. She was 22, had just moved to Austin, worked in marketing, and said she was quiet, clean, and mostly at home working. Out of everyone, she seemed the least risky, so I suggested we meet at a coffee shop near my place. In person, she looked normal and talked softly, answered questions directly, didn't overshare. She agreed to pay $600 plus half utilities, follow some basic rules, and we set her move-in date for the next week. The first month was almost suspiciously smooth. Mia moved in with 2 suitcases, set her laptop on the tiny table by the window, and basically lived there. When I left for my 5 a.m. shift, she'd already be awake. When I came home, she was still typing. She cooked, washed her dishes, never left a mess, didn't bring anyone over or play loud music. For such a small place, it stayed quiet and neat, and I remember telling a coworker my new roommate was kind of perfect. In the second month, she started asking more. At dinner, she'd ask what time I usually left and got home, how long it took to get to work, whether my manager ever changed my shifts. Then she wanted to know which coffee shop it was, and if I could check my phone much. Later, she moved to my personal life. If I had a boyfriend, if anyone stayed over, who my closest friends were. Her tone stayed calm and flat, like she was filling out a survey. I answered but kept details vague, joked that my dating life was boring, and told myself she was just awkward and trying to bond. One afternoon, my manager cut me early, so I came home a few hours before I usually did. As soon as I opened the door, I heard movement down the hallway, and my bedroom door opened. Mia stepped out and froze. "Oh, Harper," she said. "I was looking for a phone charger. I must have gone into the wrong room." There were only 2 doors, bathroom and my room, and she wasn't holding a charger. I checked my stuff, saw nothing obviously moved, and didn't want to accuse her, so I told her, "Next time, ask," and tried to let it go. About a week later, I noticed my makeup in a different order and 2 books on my shelf swapped. Nothing missing, just slightly wrong. One night while we cooked, I asked, as lightly as I could, if she'd been in my room. Mia frowned, said no, said she tried to respect boundaries, and offered to help me look. She seemed confused, and I felt stupid and paranoid for bringing it up. In the 3rd month, it stopped feeling minor. One afternoon, I opened Instagram, saw I was logged out, and when I reset the password, my DMs were full of messages I didn't remember sending. Friends were asking what was going on, saying I was hacked. I apologized and changed the password. That evening, I came home and Mia asked if I'd changed my passwords because she couldn't find something on Instagram. I hadn't told anyone about the hack. I stared at her and asked how she knew about my passwords. She paused, said she assumed, and went back to her laptop. Later that night, I opened my laptop, pulled up my browser history, and saw logins to my email and Instagram from our IP address on days I was gone at work. That's how I realized Mia had been monitoring me online the whole time. The next morning, I waited until Mia closed her laptop and told her I knew someone had been logging into my email and Instagram from our Wi-Fi while I was at work. I said she was the only one who could do that. She tried to brush it off, said maybe I'd been hacked. I brought up the weird messages and the time I found her in my room. When I didn't drop it, she started crying and admitted she had looked through some of my things and accounts because she wanted to know me better and wanted to be like me. I told her that was not normal, that it was a huge violation, and said I wanted her to move out. Her crying stopped almost immediately. She reminded me we had agreed she could stay 6 months, that she had already paid and had nowhere else to go. She said I could not legally kick her out just because I felt uncomfortable. I did not want a legal fight, and I honestly did not know the rules. I told her I would handle it properly, and went to work. On my next day off, I went to a lawyer with our text messages and payment screenshots, and explained what she had been doing. He said getting her out early would probably take at least 2 months, and that I needed clear proof if I claimed she was invading my privacy. After that, I felt trapped, but at least knew what to do. That night, I bought a hidden camera and set it up in my room facing the door and my desk. I told Mia my manager was giving me extra hours so she would expect me gone. For 3 days, I went to work and checked the recordings at night. On the 3rd day, the video showed Mia walking into my room, opening my closet, trying on my clothes, then sitting at my desk and reading my diary while taking photos. After that, she pulled out a folder with my bank papers and ID copy, and photographed those too. The next morning, I put the video on a flash drive and went to the police station. At the station, I told the officer everything and gave him the drive. He watched enough to see what she was doing, asked how long she had lived there and if she ever had permission to be in my room, then said they would talk to her, and that I should stay with someone else if I felt unsafe. Later that day, they went by the apartment. That evening, a detective called and said Mia had admitted to accessing my accounts and documents, said she had been copying my identity and trying to become me, and mentioned psychological issues she had never disclosed. With her admission and the video, they helped me get a restraining order that said she had to move out within a week. She moved out within the week, packing while I was at work. Then packages started showing up with no return address. Tea I'd mentioned, a book I wanted, a scarf in my favorite color. Every item was something I remembered saying to her. That went on for 3 months. Then a police officer called and said Mia had been arrested for violating the restraining order and assaulting another woman. I moved to a new apartment and live alone, though the rent is high. People tell me to screen roommates better, but I do not know how. She seemed normal, and that is what scares me. I lost my hospital job in March 2021 because of budget cuts, so I started doing courier work for a 24-hour prescription delivery service. At 31, that felt like falling backwards in life, but the pay was decent, especially for night shifts, and I could pick my own hours. I usually worked 7 p.m. to 3 a.m., because that's when most of the urgent orders came in with extra tips. People ordering pain meds, cold medicine, baby formula, antibiotics for sick kids, that sort of thing. The work was straightforward. Pick up from the 24-hour pharmacy, scan the bag in the app, drive to the address, leave it at the door or hand it over, swipe complete, repeat. The company hammered a few rules into us during onboarding. Never open the bags. Always check name and date of birth if you hand meds over in person. And if an address looks wrong, message through the app instead of improvising. That last one made sense to me. I'd watched what happened at the hospital when someone tried to guess anything related to meds. I liked the structure. It scratched the same part of my brain as hospital work, without me having to watch any one code in front of me. Weekends were the busiest. More drunk people, more last-minute prescriptions, more money. I kept pepper spray in the driver's door, my phone mounted with the navigation open, and I'd stay in the car if something felt off instead of walking into drama for a $10 tip. By early April, I'd been doing it about a month, and nothing really weird had happened yet. Sketchy apartment hallways, sure. One guy tried to tip me with a little bag of weed. A crying mom grabbed formula from me and almost hugged me. But it was all normal night shift stuff. I was tired, my back hurt, but my rent was paid, and I kept telling myself it was temporary until I got back into a hospital. On a Saturday night in early April around 11, I got an order for insulin and syringes. That didn't stand out at first. We did a lot of diabetes meds. What made me pause was the address. It was in the industrial area on the east side of the city, a part of town I'd never delivered to. When I zoomed in on the map, all I saw were warehouses, loading docks, and small plants. No houses, no apartment buildings. Nothing that looked like someone actually lived there. What really bothered me was the pin itself. The GPS coordinates pointed to an office building. Not even one of those mixed-use things. Just a plain office complex on a block of dead-looking streets. I double-checked the details, then hit the chat icon. "Hi, this is Lisa, your courier," I typed. "Can you confirm the address? It looks commercial on my map." The reply came almost instantly, like the person had been waiting for the notification. "Yes, correct. Working late, can't leave. Bring to 3rd floor, office 12. Another message appeared right after. "Leave items at the door and call when you arrive." No name, no please, nothing. The order was prepaid with a generous tip already added, more than people usually put in before a delivery. It was insulin too. If the order was legitimate and I refused it because I felt weird about an office, someone could end up in trouble. I really needed the money, and I didn't want to be the reason a diabetic didn't get their meds, so I accepted and started driving east. The city got emptier the farther I went. Streetlights stretched out, then thinned. Storefronts turned into fenced lots and dark buildings. My GPS told me to turn off onto a side street with no other cars around. When I pulled into the address, it hit me how dead the place really was. The building was completely dark. Office complex, maybe 4 or 5 stories, every window black. No cleaners lights, no computer screens left on, nothing. The parking lot was totally empty. Not a single car except my little hatchback under a tired streetlight. I parked facing the exit out of habit and checked the time on the dashboard. 11:40 p.m. Late for working late in an empty building on a Saturday. For a second, I hovered over the cancel button in the app. Then I pictured someone sitting inside watching the little map, waiting for their insulin, and I couldn't make myself pull the plug. I rolled closer to the front entrance and killed the engine so I could hear. The main door was glass and metal with a vertical line of buzzers and half-peeled name labels. The intercom had a tiny green power light glowing. I found 12 on the panel, pressed the button, and stood there with the insulated bag hanging from my hand, suddenly very aware that my car was the only one in sight. There was a long pause, long enough that I started to think no one would answer. Then a man's voice came through, slightly muffled but calm. "Come in. Door will unlock in a second." No greeting, no thank you. Just that. A loud metallic click sounded from the lock. I hesitated, thumb resting on my phone, then told myself the app had my location and timestamp either way. I pushed the door open and stepped into the lobby. Inside it was dark except for strips of emergency lighting running low along the hallway and a red exit sign. The air was stale, like no one had been here in a while. The elevator doors were propped open with an orange cone, an out-of-service sign taped to the buttons, so stairs were my only option. I shifted the bag so I had a better grip and pushed through the heavy stairwell door. The stairwell was narrow and echoed with each footstep, bare concrete and metal railings. I started climbing with the bag of insulin and syringes in my hand, counting the steps without thinking about it, listening to my own breathing in that tight space. Got to the 2nd floor landing and stopped. Something about this whole situation hit me all at once. Standing there on the 2nd floor landing, I finally really looked at the bag instead of just treating it like another order. The label listed insulin vials, but the attached box was full of regular 5 milliliter disposable syringes, not insulin syringes. Anyone on insulin wouldn't order these. I'd passed meds for years on the floor. I knew that without even thinking. My gut went from uneasy to flat-out alarm. I pulled out my phone and reopened the order details. The customer profile showed as a brand new account created that same day. No past orders, no notes from support, Nothing. Just this one big purchase going to a dark office building in an industrial zone at almost midnight. The note still said to bring it to the 3rd floor, office 12, leave it at the door and call. My hand actually started to sweat around the phone. Every bit of training we got kept repeating in my head about not walking into situations that felt wrong. I turned away from the stairs and headed back down. I didn't run, but I moved fast. Down to the 1st floor, through the lobby, out the glass door, every step feeling heavier until I was back in the open air again. As soon as I cleared the entrance, I picked up my pace and almost jogged to my car. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there staring at the steering wheel for a second, listening to my heartbeat and the silence around the lot. Then I pulled up the app and hit the company support number. The woman who answered sounded tired but alert. She asked for my order number, then asked what was going on. I told her straight. Wrong type of syringes for insulin, brand new account, strange industrial address, dark empty building, late at night, and a man on the intercom telling me to come to the 3rd floor alone. I said I didn't feel safe going up there. She was quiet for a few seconds, then said I'd done the right thing backing out. She told me she was canceling the order, refunding the customer, and marking it as a safety concern so I'd still get my base pay. Before we hung up, she asked me to file a written incident report in the app so the address could be flagged for future orders. I promised I would as soon as I got home. When the call ended, I set the phone down and realized my hands were shaking a little. I forced myself to sit there and breathe for a minute. While I was staring at the building, a window on the 3rd floor suddenly lit up. It wasn't bright, more like a lamp or a screen, but it moved like someone was walking around up there. After a few seconds, it went dark again. That was enough. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot. I drove home with one eye on the mirrors the whole time. The streets were almost empty, and no one followed me, but I still parked close to my building and went straight upstairs. For the next few days, I declined any orders near that industrial zone and stuck to the busier parts of town. About a week later, a coworker said an order from that place was auto-blocked because of my complaint. I still don't know what was wanted, drugs or a prank. I'm glad I never went to 3rd floor, don't want to know. I've been working as a dispatcher for a construction supply delivery company for 3 years now. My shift usually starts at 7 in the morning and ends at 4 in the afternoon. I sit in the office coordinating driver routes. That day, around 3 in the afternoon, there were only 3 active trucks on the line, and I was on the phone with a customer complaining that his delivery of concrete blocks was at least 20 minutes late. I was apologizing for the 3rd time when the office door opened and Rachel walked in. She works in warehouse documents, receiving and shipping, and she almost never comes in while I'm mid-call. She just stood there, one hand on the door frame, staring at me with this tight look on her face. I finished the call as fast as I could, promised the customer I'd verify the ETA, and hung up. "What's wrong?" I asked. She didn't sit down, which already told me a lot. "One of the trucks just came back," she said. "Thomas. He parked out back and left." I frowned and glanced at the screen. According to the system, Thomas was still en route, heading to his last stop. "No, he's supposed to be on Maple," I said. "I just talked to him like half an hour ago." Rachel shook her head. "I watched him pull into the lot. He got out, shut the cab door, and walked straight out the side gate. He didn't come in to sign anything, and he left the cargo bay open." That part made me stand up. Drivers don't leave open bays, not with the stuff we haul. "Open how?" I asked. "Like cracked or—" "Rolled up," she said. "You can see inside." She shifted the clipboard in her hands. "I didn't want to touch anything without you, but it's weird, right? He usually stays till 4. She was right. Thomas complains if he's 5 minutes short on his timesheet. Leaving early, leaving a truck open, not answering the warehouse radio, none of that was like him. I tried him on the radio from my desk. No answer, just static. I checked the GPS again, saw the little truck icon still out on the road. System's lagging, I muttered. Either way, we needed to close that truck. If something went missing, it would be both our names on the report. Okay, I said. Let's go look. We cut through the warehouse and out the back door into the lot where the company trucks sit. Thomas's truck, the white Isuzu with the blue stripe, was parked at the far edge by the fence instead of in his usual lane. The rear cargo door was rolled up maybe halfway. From where we stood, I could see the inside looked mostly empty. That's how he left it, Rachel said quietly. He didn't even look back at it. She pointed to the side gate. He just walked out. I walked closer with her a step behind me. Standing at the bumper, I ducked under the partly open door and stepped up into the cargo bay. It was almost completely empty. Just bare metal, some loose straps hanging down, and a couple pieces of cardboard on the floor. No pallets, no pipe. Nothing from the manifest I'd built that morning. Then I saw it. At the very front, tight against the bulkhead, was a single cardboard box. Maybe a meter by a meter, squared off and neat. No shipping label, no barcodes, no company logo. Just brown cardboard with a strip of clear tape across the top, still glossy like it had just been applied. Everything else in the truck looked like it had been unloaded. That one box didn't fit. Rachel stayed at the opening. "That on his sheet?" she asked. I shook my head. No. He just had pallets today. I checked again visually, almost like the label would appear if I stared long enough. Nothing. "Maybe it's a return," Rachel said, but even she didn't sound convinced. Returns always come with paperwork taped to the side. This one was clean. "Should we call Thomas?" she asked after a second. I stepped back down from the truck. That was the only thing that made sense. Before we started touching random freight, we needed to know why he dropped it and walked off. I pulled my phone out and dialed his number. It rang until voicemail. I hung up, tried again. Same thing. No text, no missed call from him on my screen. "He's not picking up," I said. Rachel crossed her arms, eyes still locked on the box. We just stood there for a moment. The two of us in the quiet lot with this random box sitting in an open truck that shouldn't even be back yet. Then the box moved. Not a lot, just a short push from the inside, enough to make one side bump against the front wall of the truck. Rachel sucked in a breath and stepped back from the bumper. I felt my throat go dry. For a second, I told myself it could be something simple. Maybe a loose tool someone tossed in there. Maybe a raccoon that got trapped at a site. I didn't say any of that out loud. We just watched. Nothing happened for a few seconds. Long enough that I started to think maybe we were both jumpy and it had just settled. Then it jerked again, harder this time, and we both heard a dull thud from inside the cardboard. "Okay. No," Rachel whispered, taking another step back. My first instinct was to tell her to stay behind me and go grab someone from the warehouse. But before I could decide what to do, the tape on top of the box stretched and popped. One of the top flaps started to rise from the inside. The tape peeled back with a loud snap, and the flap folded open. A hand in a black work glove came up through the opening, feeling for the edge. Then a second hand appeared. The flaps pushed wider, and a man pulled himself out of the box. He was thin, dressed in black work clothes and heavy boots, face covered by a black balaclava. He moved like he'd done this before, knee on the cardboard, then both feet on the metal floor. He stepped to the edge of the truck, jumped down to the asphalt, straightened up, and walked past us with quick, steady strides. He didn't even look at us. The man stood up, brushed himself off, and headed toward the edge of the cargo bay. Rachel screamed, this short, sharp sound, and I couldn't say a word. He didn't react to her at all. He stepped over the torn flaps, crouched, and jumped down to the asphalt. For a second, he just stood there, turning his head, looking at the lot, the warehouse doors, the office windows. Then he started walking fast toward the warehouse gate like he knew exactly where he was going. Rachel was the first to move. She yanked her phone out and said, "I'm calling the police. Stay here." I didn't stay. My brain went straight to the gate controls and the fact that the back entrance was still open and there were guys in the loading lanes who had no idea some stranger had just climbed out of a box behind them. I ran for the office door. Behind me, I heard Rachel already talking to the dispatcher, giving our company name and address, saying, "There's a man. He came out of a box in one of our trucks. He's dressed all in black. He just left the yard." By the time I got to the security monitor and hit the button to close the big gate, I could see him on the screen. He didn't even look at the rolling gate. He cut straight to the pedestrian gate by the fence. It stays unlocked during business hours because drivers hate fumbling with keys. He pushed it open and slipped through without even slowing down. The last thing I saw on the monitor was his back as he disappeared around the corner of the neighboring building. I just stood there for a second with my hands still on the control. I could hear Rachel's voice getting quieter as she walked back in, still on the line with the dispatcher, confirming that he was no longer on our property. When she hung up, she was pale and shaking a little. "They've got a unit on the way," she said. "We're supposed to stay inside, not follow, not touch anything." That was fine with me. I went back to my desk and pulled up the route screen, staring at Thomas's line like maybe there'd be some hidden note explaining why a masked man had just stepped out of his truck. There wasn't. About 20 minutes later, 2 officers came in through the front door. We walked them through the warehouse and out into the lot. Thomas's truck was still parked wrong, over by the fence. The box was still in the front of the cargo bay, half collapsed on one side where he'd forced his way out. One of the officers used the end of his pen to lift the top. Inside there was nothing but crushed cardboard and a scrap of dark fabric. "You didn't touch anything?" he asked. We both said no. They wrote that down, took our IDs, and started separate statements right there next to the bumper while another officer did a quick walk around the fence line. We both gave the same description. Thin build, all black clothes, black gloves, black mask, average height, normal walk. No tattoos, no visible scars, nothing helpful. I kept repeating, "He didn't even look at us." And one of the officers just nodded like he'd heard that 1,000 times. When they asked about cameras, I finally felt like we had something useful. I told them about the lot cameras, the ones on the warehouse doors, and the hallway inside. They asked to see the footage from that morning and from the last hour. Our manager came out, talked to them for a minute, then took one officer back to the little room where the DVR sits. While they were in there pulling clips, he finally managed to reach Thomas on his personal phone and told him to return to the office immediately. I stayed up front with the other officer, answering the same questions in slightly different ways, going over times, when we first saw the truck, when we first saw the box. Thomas showed up about 40 minutes later. Instead of coming through the yard like he usually did, he came in the front door and stopped as soon as he saw the uniforms. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. The officer asked him to come sit in the break room. I went too, because I'm dispatch and the truck is under my board. Thomas kept looking at me like he was trying to figure out how much I already knew. He started out playing dumb. He said he didn't know who the man was, didn't know what was in the box, thought it was just extra cargo headed back to the warehouse. After a few minutes of questions, he finally dropped that. He rubbed his forehead and said, "Okay, look, it was this guy this morning. He was waiting by the outer gate, said he needed a package brought back here, offered me 300 cash. He said the guy told him it was equipment parts for someone in the warehouse, that the paperwork had gotten messed up and it would save everybody time if Thomas just threw it on his truck. Thomas admitted the guy helped him load the box into the back before he left on his first run. No paperwork, no signatures, nothing in our system. Thomas told himself it was harmless side work because the destination was the same as the company route and nobody would get hurt. On his way back in that afternoon, the same man called his cell. According to Thomas, the instructions were simple. Park the truck, leave the cargo bay door open, walk out like normal, and someone from maintenance would take it from there and hand him the money later. While Thomas was talking, the officer who'd been in the camera room came in with a USB stick and sat down. He said they had clear footage of the man by the outer fence in the morning talking to Thomas, then later waiting by the side of the lot and watching the truck pull in, and then climbing out of the box and heading for the gate. They also had traffic cam footage from the street showing the same clothing and build leaving our block. The officers told us what they thought the plan had been. The man in the box was supposed to ride in unnoticed, stay hidden in the truck until after closing, then get out inside the fenced yard and let his partner in through the gate or a side door. With nobody around, they could clean out the more expensive power tools and whatever else they wanted and be gone before anyone came in the next morning. Because Thomas cut his route a little short and Rachel noticed the truck parked wrong, the guy had to come out early and bail. The police took copies of the footage, our statements, and Thomas's full story. For the next few days, the whole warehouse felt on edge. Drivers were suddenly very careful about who they talked to at the gate, and our manager started locking the pedestrian gate unless someone was actively using it. A few days later, he called me and Rachel into his office and told us the detectives had matched the man in black to prior cases and found his partner from other cameras near our street. They picked up the masked guy first, and then the man who had approached Thomas at the gate. Both men were detained within a few days. During my junior year at university, I used to crash at my buddy Ethan's place after late study sessions. He rented this massive old Victorian house near campus with 2 other students, and compared to my cramped dorm, it felt like a maze. The place had 3 floors, high ceilings, weirdly long hallways, and this huge attic they used for storage. I'd usually just knock out on his futon after we were done cramming and roll straight to class in the morning. That night in October, I stayed over because I had an early exam in his building the next morning, and it made more sense than going back to my dorm. His 2 housemates were gone for the weekend, one visiting family, the other at a concert out of state. So it was just us. We spread our notes across his living room coffee table, mainline cheap energy drinks, ordered Chinese, the usual. By 10, we were half watching some stupid comedy and half pretending to study. Around 11 p.m. we heard this loud creaking from upstairs, like someone stepping on an old floorboard directly above us. It wasn't the normal settling kind of sound. It had weight to it, like an actual step. Ethan barely looked up and said the house always made noise, that the pipes and the old beams did their own thing. But I noticed there wasn't any wind outside, and there wasn't a heating system kicking on. The show kept playing, but I realized I was listening more to the ceiling than to the TV. It went quiet again, so we shrugged it off. I told myself it was probably just the wood expanding or whatever, and went back to my lo mein. About 20 minutes later, though, we heard it again. Only this time it didn't sound like a step. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the attic floor. Not long, just this short, ugly scrape, and then nothing. I put my carton down and looked at Ethan, and he had this little frown like he was finally actually hearing it too. He muted the TV and we just sat there for a second, both staring at the ceiling like idiots. Another shorter creak followed, farther back, almost like whoever or whatever it was had shifted their weight. Ethan sighed and said, "Okay, that one was weird." He told me they hadn't been up to the attic in weeks because it was a pain to climb up there, and there shouldn't be anything up there that could move on its own. He wasn't panicking or anything, just confused in a way that made me uneasy too. Finally, he said we should check it out before we scared ourselves for no reason. It wasn't some macho thing. We both just wanted to rule out a raccoon or someone breaking in. The attic entrance was on the 3rd floor at the end of a narrow hallway, one of those fold-down ladder things with wooden steps. We went up the stairs together, not talking much, and Ethan pulled the cord on the hatch. The ladder unfolded with this loud clatter that made me jump more than I want to admit. He turned on his phone flashlight and we climbed up slowly, him first, me right behind holding onto the sides. The attic was this massive, unfinished space with exposed beams and a thick layer of dust everywhere. There were old boxes, broken furniture, a couple of bikes with flat tires, random junk left by previous tenants stacked in uneven piles. My socks picked up grit with every step. Ethan swept the light around in a slow circle, but he didn't see anything that looked freshly moved or out of place. No broken window, no obvious animal, no sign of someone hiding. The air felt still and stale. We stood more or less in the middle listening, just the light from his phone and the faint noise of the muted TV downstairs. For a few seconds there was absolutely nothing, and I was about to crack a joke about haunted houses when we heard it. Breathing, not ours. This quiet but distinct sound, slow and uneven, coming from the far corner behind a pile of boxes near the back wall. I felt every hair on my arm stand up, and Ethan's hand tightened on his phone. He pointed the light that way, and for a second we didn't see anything. Just cardboard and a tall, warped dresser. Then he shifted the angle of the beam, and we saw feet in dirty sneakers sticking out from behind the old dresser, ankles crossed like someone had been lying down back there. Ethan called out, asking who was there, and this figure slowly stood up from behind the dresser. It was a guy, maybe 25, with an overgrown beard, filthy clothes, and tired, scared eyes that squinted against the light. He put his hands up around chest level, palms out, and started talking fast, his voice cracking a little as he said he didn't want any trouble, and he just needed a place to sleep. Up close, he didn't look drunk or high, just exhausted and wired at the same time. He kept glancing between us and the ladder like he was deciding if he needed to bolt. Turned out he was a former student who said he'd gotten kicked out of the dorms 3 weeks earlier for not paying tuition. He knew this house got rented to students with rotating tenants, so one night he'd snuck in through an unlocked 3rd floor window and set up camp in the attic where he figured nobody ever went. He explained all of that in a rush, stumbling over details, like he'd practiced the speech in his head. He said he'd been coming down at night when everyone was asleep to grab food from the fridge and use the bathroom, timing it so he could hear doors close before he moved. The guy swore he only took food, nothing else from the house. Said he wasn't trying to hurt anyone, that he just ran out of options and needed somewhere dry and quiet. As he talked, he kept his hands up and his back close to the wall, like he expected us to swing on him or start yelling for the cops at any second. His voice shook on certain words, and when Ethan shifted his weight, the guy actually flinched. Whatever else he was, he looked desperate and genuinely terrified that we'd found him. Ethan just stared at him for a long second, then looked over at me. I could tell he was trying to be the reasonable one, but his jaw was tight and he kept shifting his phone from one hand to the other like he didn't know whether to call someone or use it as a weapon. I wasn't trying to be dramatic, but all I could think was that this guy had been above our heads while we slept, listening to us, maybe even walking around when he thought nobody was home. Whatever his story was, that part alone felt wrong. I told Ethan we needed to call the police because we couldn't just let some stranger keep living in the attic. I tried to keep my voice steady so I didn't escalate anything, but I also didn't sugarcoat it. I said, "Man, this is illegal, and it's dangerous. We don't know him." The guy heard that and started begging, saying he'd leave that night, he'd grab his stuff and disappear. We'd never see him again. Ethan swallowed hard, nodded once, and stepped back toward the ladder while keeping the flashlight on him. He agreed we didn't really have a choice, so he called 911, turned the speaker on, and gave them the address while keeping his eyes on the guy. The dispatcher asked if he was armed, if he'd threatened us. Ethan said no, that he was calm but trespassing, that he'd been secretly living in the attic. They told us to come down from the attic and wait in the living room, keep the door unlocked, and avoid cornering him. I told the guy flat out that the police were coming and that nobody needed to do anything stupid. To my surprise, he didn't run. He just kind of sagged against the wall and nodded like he'd expected this ending. We all went downstairs together, Ethan in front, the guy in the middle, me behind them. I kept enough distance that if he tried anything I'd have room to move, but he didn't. We sat in the living room, the TV still muted, and he told us more of his story while we waited. He said he'd lost his scholarship after his grades tanked from working nights. Then he got behind on tuition and the school dropped him. His parents refused to help, told him he'd made his choices. He tried to find work but couldn't get hired anywhere decent without a stable address, and everything spiraled. He said he'd slept on couches, then in stairwells, then finally remembered this house from a party and decided the attic was better than the street. He kept insisting he never meant to scare anyone, that he only took food and used the bathroom and tried to be invisible. I felt bad for him on some level, but the whole time I kept picturing him walking around upstairs while we were down here, learning our routines in the dark. It didn't change the fact that he'd broken in and stayed for weeks without telling anyone. Ethan was quiet, just nodding sometimes, staring at the floor more than at the guy. About 15 minutes later there was a knock, and then 2 officers stepped inside after announcing themselves. We stood up, moved away, and let them do their thing. They talked to him, checked his ID, asked us a few questions, then told him he was being detained for trespassing. He didn't fight it. They cuffed him, walked him out to the car, and one officer came back to explain that since nothing valuable was missing and nobody was hurt, he'd probably get referred to social services instead of going straight to jail. After the cops left with him, Ethan locked the door and just exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. Neither of us said anything for a minute. Finally, he said we should go back up and see what it actually looked like where the guy had been staying, so we'd know if anything else was messed with. It felt messed up to be curious, but I agreed because I also wanted to make sure there wasn't anything dangerous up there. We pulled the ladder down again and climbed back into the attic, this time both of us with our phone lights on. In the far corner behind the boxes and that old dresser, we found his setup. There was an old sleeping bag laid out on top of flattened cardboard, a little pile of water bottles lined up against the wall, leftover food containers stacked in a neat row, and a phone plugged into an outlet that apparently still worked up there. It was all very organized, like he'd planned to stay for a while. He'd made this little nest in that corner where you couldn't see him unless you walked all the way back and deliberately looked behind the dresser. From where we had stood earlier, he would have been invisible. There were a couple of notebooks with job listings scribbled down, a campus map, and a schedule he'd made of when people in the house usually came and went. Seeing our names and rough times written down in his handwriting did something weird to my stomach. The creepiest part wasn't the mess or the sleeping bag. It was realizing he'd been watching our routines, tracking when we slept, when the house was empty, when it was safe for him to come down for food or to shower. There were little notes like, Tues Thurs, house empty afternoon, and weekends, parties, loud, easier to move. He had basically turned our lives into a timetable for his own survival. We went back downstairs, shut the attic, and Ethan installed temporary latches on the ladder that night, real locks on it, and on all the third-floor windows the next day. Neither of us slept more than an hour. For weeks after, every creak made me tense up, and I kept catching myself staring at the ceiling, imagining footsteps. I still think about that guy sometimes, and I honestly don't know what scares me more. The fact that a stranger lived above us for weeks without us knowing, or the idea that if we hadn't heard those sounds that night, he might still be up there now, quietly fitting his life into the spaces we don't bother to look at. When I saw the lock-picking tools spread across his floor, I knew we'd stayed at that motel way too long. But let me back up. My name is Ashley. I was 28 at the time, working as a regional manager for a chain of gas stations. My co-worker Victoria and I were driving to a 3-day conference in Idaho, company-paid, rental car, 3 nights away from our stores. We picked the Sunset View Motel because it was cheap, had decent online reviews, and was about 20 minutes from the conference center. Nothing fancy, just one of those long 2-story buildings with outside walkways. At the front desk, an elderly man with a gray mustache checked us in, scanned my card, and handed over 2 key cards with barely any small talk. We dragged our suitcases up the narrow staircase to the 3rd floor and found room 312. Victoria tried the first card, slid it, and the lock flashed red instead of green. She tried the second one, same thing. She groaned, said she'd run back down to get them fixed, and disappeared toward the stairs while I stayed with the bags in the hallway. I leaned against the wall and started answering emails on my phone. After a minute or two, a door opened at the far end of the corridor, and a man stepped out. Mid-30s maybe, wrinkled shirt, jeans, no luggage. He walked toward me slowly, looking at every door number like he was counting. When he reached me, he stopped and asked if I'd seen a flyer about breakfast times that fell off the bulletin board. The question felt off, because the breakfast schedule was printed on a sticker on every door, including ours, and it was posted downstairs at the desk. I pointed right beside my shoulder and told him, "There." He nodded but didn't go anywhere. Instead, he asked where we were from, if we were here for work, what company. I gave short, vague answers about a regional conference and went back to staring at my screen. Footsteps came from the stairs behind him, and Victoria appeared with new keycards in her hand. As soon as he noticed her, he smiled at both of us, said something like, "Enjoy your stay," and walked back down the hall toward his room at the end. We opened 312, dumped our bags, and the whole thing felt minor enough that we didn't talk about it again until later that night. We spent the next few hours in that room going over slides, answering texts from store managers, and complaining about whoever scheduled a regional meeting for a Monday morning. Around 8, we finally shut our laptops and decided on a local pizza place the front desk had recommended. I stepped into the hallway first, while Victoria dug through her purse. The same man was standing by the vending machine, head bent over his phone. As I locked our door, he looked up and smiled. "Headed out to eat?" he asked, like we were neighbors instead of strangers. I said yeah, and started walking toward the elevator. When we passed him, I glanced at his screen without meaning to. He had a photo open of the parking lot, shot from above, and right in the middle was Victoria's car with her beach sticker and license plate perfectly clear. I jerked my eyes away so fast I'm not sure he noticed. My brain started throwing out excuses immediately. Maybe he was comparing rental cars. Maybe it just looked like hers. Maybe I was being dramatic. In the elevator, I told Victoria what I'd seen. She frowned and said it was probably some random silver sedan, that I needed sleep. We still went to dinner, but I kept watching the door every time it opened. Back at the motel, walking through the lobby, I slowed near the desk. I told Victoria we should maybe mention the guy to the clerk, just to have it on record. She shook her head, said we weren't even sure it was her car, and she didn't want to start trouble or make a scene that first night. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a quiet scraping sound. At first I thought it was coming from the next room, but then I realized it was at our door. Someone was working on the lock from outside. I held my breath for a second, trying to decide if I was dreaming. And then that cold adrenaline hit, and I knew I was awake. I reached over and shook Victoria's shoulder. She tried to roll away and I whispered, "Vic, wake up. Someone's at the door." She froze instantly. We both stared at the door. The scraping was soft but steady, metal on metal, like someone who knew what they were doing and was trying not to be heard. After maybe half a minute, the sound stopped. There was a small click, then slow footsteps walking away down the corridor. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could and went to the peephole. The hallway was empty. No doors opening, nobody walking. But near the vending machine a few steps down was a screwdriver lying on the carpet that definitely hadn't been there when we came in. I told Victoria what I saw, and she swore under her breath. We already had the deadbolt turned, but I locked the chain and dragged the extra chair over to wedge it under the handle. She sat on the edge of her bed with her phone in her hand, emergency screen open, thumb on the button. We agreed that if we heard even one more sound at the door, we'd call the police. We didn't sleep after that. We took turns at the peephole, switching every 20 or 30 minutes, checking the time on our phones and listening for any noise. We heard doors, a TV somewhere, plumbing, but nobody came back toward our room. By the time light started to show around the curtains, both of us were wired and exhausted. Around 7, we went downstairs to the front desk with our bags because we'd already decided we weren't staying another night. The elderly man from check-in was gone. A young woman was behind the counter. We told her everything. The guy with the breakfast question, the photo of our car, the scraping at the door, the screwdriver on the floor. Her whole expression changed. She picked up the phone and called their security. A few minutes later, an older man in a faded uniform came in. He listened, wrote everything down in a small notebook, and said he'd review the cameras and talk to the manager. Then he added that there were no cameras on the third-floor walkway, so if someone had been at our door, there wouldn't be any video. He didn't say we were overreacting, but it was clear he didn't feel the urgency we did. Victoria wanted to check out and drive straight home, skip the conference completely. I wanted that too, but missing a mandatory regional meeting would have meant a whole mess with our boss and corporate. We stood in the lobby going back and forth until we finally agreed to a compromise. We'd go to the conference, sit through the main sessions, then come back in the afternoon, grab our things, and move to a different hotel. We spent the morning at the conference barely listening. Every break, we checked our phones, half expecting a missed call from an unknown number. Nothing. Around 5, we drove back to the Sunset View. As soon as we pulled into the lot and saw a police cruiser parked near the office, my stomach dropped. Inside, the same young clerk from that morning came over right away. She said the security guy had decided to check the suspicious guest's room. The man had checked out that morning without stopping at the desk. When they entered the room, he was gone. But on the table they found a full set of lock-picking tools laid out like a kit. She said they also found printed photographs of the parking lot, several of them, with close-ups of different license plates, including Victoria's car. On the nightstand, there was a notepad with a list of room numbers in blocky handwriting. Our room, 312, was in the middle of the list, and underlined twice. Next to it was a folded state map with small marks along the highway, lined up with other motels. The officers asked us to sit down and give formal statements. One detective told us there had been similar complaints in a neighboring county about a man matching that description hanging around cheap motels, asking questions, watching women come and go, but they'd never managed to catch him doing anything they could charge. Hearing that made me feel worse, not better, because it meant this was probably part of a pattern. The motel refunded all our money on the spot and offered us a free room at another property in their chain, but we both refused immediately. We booked a room at a big hotel downtown, paid triple what Sunset View cost, and still double-checked the lock 3 times before we tried to sleep. I still don't know exactly what that man had planned, why our room number was underlined on his list, or what would have happened if I hadn't woken up to that scraping at the door. But every time I picture that screwdriver on the carpet, I'm just glad we took it seriously instead of telling ourselves it was nothing. I've been working as a night security guard at this medical equipment warehouse in Portland for 8 months now. The building is massive, 2 long wings with this dead admin block in the middle that nobody's used in years. My shift runs from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and most nights are exactly what you'd expect. Rounds on the hour, cameras, coffee, phone, repeat. After years of bar security and retail loss prevention, quiet nights in an empty warehouse felt like winning the lottery, or at least like something I could live with. That night started out normal. I badged in, signed the logbook, skimmed the maintenance notes, nothing flagged. At midnight, I did my first full round. West Wing like always, tugging on the emergency exits, checking the loading bay doors, shining my flashlight down between the racks of boxed equipment. Everything looked right. I took the corridor that passes the old admin block. Its windows were dark, just shapes of desks and cabinets inside. The glass door was chained from the outside with a padlock that looked older than me. I glanced at it, kept walking, finished the east wing, wrote 0012 clear in the log, and went back to the office to half-watch some show on my tablet. A little after 2 a.m., I heard a dull thud from somewhere deep in the east wing. It was enough to make me pause the show and sit up, but not the kind of noise that screams emergency. It sounded like a heavy crate hitting concrete. I cycled through the cameras that cover that side of the building. Empty aisles, wrapped pallets, nothing moving. Stuff shifts sometimes when it is stacked high. If I called my supervisor every time something settled, I'd be that guard no one took seriously. I checked the clock, wrote 2:05 single impact east wing, cams clear in the log, and tried to focus back on the episode, but I left the volume low and kept one eye on the monitors. Maybe 20 minutes later, there was another thud. Same kind of sound but closer, like it came from the middle of the building near the admin block. This one I felt through the desk. I did not even bother with the cameras. Something about it hit that bar fight instinct in me, that tight feeling in your stomach before anything happens. I grabbed my flashlight, clipped my radio to my shoulder, and headed down the main corridor toward the east wing at a steady walk. No point running if it was nothing, but I wanted eyes on that area, not just a screen. Out on the floor, I checked the exterior doors. The alarm panels showed armed and the handles were solid when I pulled on them. Then I walked the aisle beside the admin block, sweeping my light between the shelves. No movement. On my way back, I glanced at the glass door and saw the chain hanging low, padlock on the floor in 2 pieces. I stayed to the side of the glass, lit up the frame, saw no pry marks and no broken glass. Inside, I could see desks and chairs. Nothing moving. Protocol says call police for a break-in, but that lock had looked ready to die since I started. The break was jagged, not clean. I told myself it could have rusted through, took a quick photo for the report, logged the time, and headed back to the front. Back in the chair, it was pushing about 3 a.m. I pulled up the cameras facing the admin block, watched each for a few seconds, and still saw nothing at all. I was reaching for the logbook when bright headlights washed across the front lot. A white delivery van rolled through the gate, went past the loading dock, and stopped at the main entrance. We do not get deliveries at 3 a.m. The driver climbed out in a blue uniform jacket with a clipboard and walked straight to the glass doors to knock. I walked to the panel, kept my key card in my hand, and without unlocking anything, pressed the intercom button and spoke into it. He said he had an urgent medical delivery and needed a signature. I told him I only accept deliveries during business hours, and he'd have to come back in the morning. He stared at me through the glass for a few seconds, like he was trying to read me, then nodded and walked back to his van. I watched him get in, but instead of pulling out, he turned off the headlights and just sat there. I went back to the monitors and pulled up the front lot camera. The van was a dark lump at the edge of the frame. I watched him take his phone out, put it to his ear, and start talking. He wasn't waving his arms around or anything, just calm, steady, like he had all night. That bothered me. Couriers are always in a rush. They drop, they sign, they go. They don't sit in a dark parking lot at 3 in the morning having a long phone call. After a few minutes of watching the timer in the corner of the screen tick along, my stomach felt heavy. I thought about calling my supervisor, but I already knew what he'd say. If he tries a door, call the cops. Otherwise, just log it. I didn't want to be the guard who called 911 over a guy sitting in a van, but I also didn't like the idea of losing track of him if he moved to the back of the building. The cameras near the loading docks aren't great. I told myself if anything else felt wrong, I'd call 911 first and explain to my boss later. For now, I wanted eyes on the outside. I grabbed my jacket, clipped my radio, and went out through the side service door to walk the perimeter. I made sure the door locked behind me, then started along the fence line, staying close to the building. One hand rested on the pepper spray at my belt. I only used my flashlight when I was right at a door or gate. I didn't want to light myself up more than I had to. Somewhere on the far side I could hear an engine idling, low and steady. With the echo off the concrete, I couldn't tell where it was at first. When I turned the corner by the east wing, I saw it. A second van was backed up near the loading dock. Lights off, engine still running. 2 men were getting out of the back with flashlights. They were talking quietly, the way people do when they expect someone might hear them. One was the same courier from the front door in the blue jacket. The other was taller, in a dark hoodie with the hood up. They shut the rear doors and started walking straight toward the same side door I had just used, like they'd been heading for it the whole time. I did a quick calculation in my head. 2 of them, 1 of me, no weapon except spray, no backup close. Going back toward them to get inside felt like stepping right into their path. I turned away from the building and cut across the asphalt toward the front lot, trying to move fast without my boots slamming against the ground. I was almost past the corner when my foot dropped into a pothole. I forget about every single shift. My ankle rolled and I went down hard on both knees. My phone flew out of my pocket and hit the ground with a loud crack. Both men spun toward the sound and their flashlights hit me at the same time. In the beams I saw the courier's face and the hood pulled low over the taller guy's eyes. The taller one shouted something short and angry, and they started moving faster in my direction. That was enough for me. I scrambled up, grabbed my phone without even looking at it, and sprinted for my car in the main lot. Going back to the door wasn't an option. If they got between me and that entrance, I'd be trapped between them and a locked building. The parking lot felt huge while I was running, but I just kept my eyes on my car. I hit the unlock button until the lights flashed, yanked the door open and threw myself inside. I slammed the lock down and slid low in the seat. My hands were shaking so hard it took 2 tries to get the dial screen to come up, but I got 911 on speaker and told the dispatcher there were 2 men, possible break-in in progress, that I was locked in my car outside the warehouse. I kept watching the mirrors while I talked, waiting to see someone running toward me, but no one appeared. 12 minutes later, the first patrol cars rolled in. It felt longer, but they came. By the time the lights swept across the lot, both vans were gone. The officers checked my ID, made sure I was steady enough to walk, then had me go with them while they cleared the building. When we got to the admin block service entrance, the side that almost never gets used, we found scattered tools, cut wire, and a broken length of chain on the concrete. The lock had fresh marks, and the alarm line that runs through that frame had been pulled out. They'd been working on getting in through the old admin block so they could bypass most of the main warehouse sensors. Later, sitting back at my desk, giving my statement with my knees throbbing and the adrenaline gone, It really sank in that the first courier was just there to test me, to see if I was alone, how quickly I reacted, if I'd hesitate to call for help. If I had ignored that first noise in the East Wing, or told myself I was just being jumpy and stayed in my chair instead of walking the perimeter when I did. They probably would have been inside the building while I sat there half watching my show, and I honestly don't want to think too hard about what they would have decided to do with me once I stopped being useful. Back in 2022, I took my first management position as cleaning service manager at Riverside Mall in the suburbs. My name is Tyler. I was 26, and until then, I'd only ever pushed the carts and scrubbed the floors, never told anyone what to do. Suddenly I had an office, a team roster, and a mall director who wanted tidy emails about sanitation outcomes, instead of just seeing me with a mop. It sounded simple. Make schedules, order supplies, handle complaints, and I honestly thought it would be quiet, boring work that left my brain free after I clocked out. Then a food court manager phoned my work cell and said, "Tyler, something's rotting out here and customers think it's our kitchen." Maintenance popped a ceiling tile, shined his flashlight into the duct, and we saw a dead rat half melted to the metal, already bloating and crawling with smaller ones. We put on masks, bagged the carcass, wiped what we could reach, sprayed disinfectant until we were coughing, and the smell still hung over the food court for days while complaints piled up in my inbox. About a week later, the burrito place at the end of the food court called, and this time the manager sounded scared instead of annoyed. Their restroom toilet had overflowed, sewage was coming up through the floor drain toward the dining area, and they'd already closed the doors and put up a handwritten sign. When the plumbers finally pulled the toilet and snaked the line, they dragged out a tight wad of cheap brown hand towels someone had shoved down there, and the restaurant stayed closed 2 days while we sanitized everything and the inspector rechecked it. 3 days after that, I was finishing the sewage report when security radioed about the children's play center on the second floor. A little boy had gotten sick in the climbing tunnel, thrown up on the padding and onto 2 other kids, and now parents were shouting at teenage staff who had no idea what to do. We went in wearing disposable suits, gloves, and masks. It took almost 3 hours to strip covers, bag everything, scrub the plastic, and log it all for the health department, and the play center had to close the rest of the day for extra treatment. By that point, I was half joking to my guys that the mall was cursed, but when I went home, my stomach stayed tight, and the joke didn't feel funny anymore. It started to hit me that none of this was random. Someone somewhere was cutting corners, bad vent sealing, towels flushed instead of binned, food sitting too long, and my team was just the last line before fines and shutdowns. I needed the paycheck, and I didn't want Riverside turning into that disgusting mall people posted about, so I tried to jump on everything early, even when it felt like I was the only one really worried. The call that finally proved it was bigger than mop work came from the basement warehouse where the stores kept their extra stock. A clothing stock clerk, sounding embarrassed, told me there was a horrible smell near their racks that was getting stronger every day. So I said I'd come down myself with the health inspector who happened to be on site. As soon as we pushed through the fire door to the basement corridor, we caught that heavy, sweet odor I'd already learned to recognize, and it got worse with every step toward the far corner of the warehouse. The clerk pointed to a wall of boxes. We helped move them aside and uncovered a chewed-out hole at the bottom of the drywall, leading into a narrow utility space I'd never seen on any plan. I knelt with my flashlight, looked inside, and saw rats everywhere on shredded cardboard and torn food packaging, droppings stacked in corners and gnawed boxes that had held sealed snacks for upstairs kiosks. The inspector didn't raise his voice, but he told me flatly that this wasn't just a minor pest issue. It was a serious sanitary violation that could close stores if anyone else saw it, and we needed to call professional pest control. The extermination company came the next morning. I met the crew at the service entrance and walked them down before the mall opened. In the corridor outside the warehouse, the lead guy ran through it again. They'd put poison blocks and traps inside the utility room and along the rat trails. We'd lock the door, nobody in or out for a few days. After that, we'd come back together and clean up the bodies. Simple steps. Awful, but simple. I signed their forms, watched them pull on coveralls and masks, then squeeze through the chewed hole with their flashlights and bait stations like they did this every day. They were done faster than I expected. The lead exterminator told me, "Give it 4 days minimum. Don't open this door unless I'm here." He said most of the colony would die in place. Maybe a few would stagger out and drop in the warehouse. But either way, it all had to be bagged and taken out through their disposal contractor. I locked the warehouse myself, told security to log any access to that area, and basically treated it like a contaminated zone. Nobody complained. Nobody wanted to go near that smell anyway. 4 days later, we met again at the same door. Even with my respirator on, the stink rolled out as soon as the lock turned. That heavy, sour smell was stronger, which meant the poison had done its job. I stepped into a disposable suit, taped the cuffs, pulled on thick gloves, and checked the filter on my mask twice out of habit. The crew geared up beside me without much small talk. One of them handed me a roll of thick labeled bags for animal remains and just said, "You'll get used to it." I didn't answer. We moved the boxes away from the chewed hole and went into the utility room. Rat bodies were everywhere now, scattered over the concrete and stuck in the torn insulation. Some were stiff, some already sinking into the floor. We worked in a line. I'd scoop with a flat shovel. Another guy held the bag, sealed it, slid it toward the door. Nobody talked unless it was stuff like, "Careful, step there," or "That one's soft." I tried to treat them like trash, not animals. Scoop, lift, drop, seal, move. Sometimes the shovel slid under something that gave too easily, and I knew it was half rotten, stuck down. Those we scraped. I kept my eyes on the shovel blade instead of the bodies, just enough to see where I was putting it. It was mechanical, but my stomach was tight the whole time. In the far corner, I saw a huge rat on its side, at least twice the size of the others. It was lying in dried foam and mess near the wall. I told myself, just get it in the bag and move on. I bent down, slid the shovel under its belly, and the second the metal touched it, the whole body jerked. The front legs clawed weakly at the floor, the head lifted a little, and it let out this low, broken squeak. I jumped back so hard I hit the wall, almost dropping the shovel. For a second I honestly thought I was imagining it through the mask, but the thing tried to drag itself forward, back half barely working, front claws scraping slow lines on the concrete. It tried to run, but it was too far gone. It moved in these jerky, confused steps, more like it was sliding than walking. One of the exterminators saw it, walked over without hesitating, and brought his shovel down once, hard. The body twitched, and then stopped. He nudged it with his boot, said, "Sometimes a few ride it out longer, like we were talking about a clogged drain," and went right back to work. I felt my throat close up. I told him I needed a minute, walked out of the warehouse, down the corridor, and tore my mask off. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The air down there wasn't even that fresh, but it felt better than breathing through the filter that smelled like death. The exterminator followed me a minute later and told me not to worry, that it happens sometimes. Some animals were more resistant to the poison. He said they'd double-check the room and I just had to keep helping with the bags. We finished the cleanup in a few hours. Every visible body went into a sealed bag. Every trap got checked, and the crew logged the numbers for the report. Maintenance came down and patched the hole in the wall, then foamed every crack they could find around that utility space. We sprayed disinfectant on the floor and lower walls until the concrete was wet, then left fans running in the warehouse with the door still locked. From there, I went straight to the small staff shower in the service area, threw my suit in the biohazard bin, scrubbed like I'd never be clean, and changed into the spare clothes I kept in my locker. Even cleaned up, I felt dirty, like something was still on me. That night, a few hours after I got home, I started feeling off. Chills, slight fever, headache that wouldn't go away. It kept climbing, and I couldn't stop thinking about that room, about the shovel scraping, about the one that was still alive. I went to urgent care the next morning. The doctor checked me over, listened to the story, and didn't like the part about the rats and the possible contact. He put me on antibiotics, told me to monitor the fever, and strongly suggested I start a rabies vaccination series, just in case, even though the risk was low. Getting those shots drove it home that I'd pushed my luck. I was on sick leave for a week. Lying there, sweating and checking my temperature and answering work emails I didn't care about, I kept replaying the warehouse in my head and realized I didn't want this job anymore. Not just the gross parts, but the constant feeling that I was one mistake away from something serious, and that nobody up the chain cared as long as the mall stayed open. When I finally went back, I did the handover, filed the last reports, and then walked into the manager's office and gave my resignation. A month later, I was working in an IT company office, dealing with broken printers and password resets instead of rat colonies, and it was the best decision of my life. During the summer of 2023, I was working for a dry cleaning company that picked up and delivered clothes straight from customers' homes. Every morning I got my route on the app, loaded the clean orders, grabbed the empty bags, and then started working through the list of addresses. People handed me bags of dirty clothes. I swapped them for plastic-covered hangers, scanned the ticket, and moved on. After 3 years on roughly the same route, I knew who lived where, who usually answered the door, even which houses had tricky gates. People opened the door, mumbled a hello, shoved a bag at me, and disappeared before I could even finish saying thanks. But about a year ago, one house on that route made me stop treating it like background noise. On that route, there was a 2-story house in a quiet, pretty nice neighborhood. A guy named David lived there. First time I dropped off his order, he told me he was a programmer who worked from home and that I could always catch him there during the day. After that, he used our service regularly, every 2 weeks, like clockwork. Tuesday was his delivery day, and on Wednesday I would swing by again to see if there was a new bag to pick up. David was one of my easiest stops. I would pull up, grab his clean clothes from the rack, and by the time I reached the front step, he was already opening the door. He would nod, maybe ask if we were busy after the holidays, take the plastic-wrapped hangers, hand me the dirty bag, and disappear again. Then one Tuesday morning around 10, I pulled up to his house like I had dozens of times before. I parked by the curb, grabbed his clean order, and walked up the short path to the front door. I was reaching for the doorbell when the door opened from the inside. Only it was not David standing there. A different man stood in the doorway, someone I had never seen at that house before. He looked a little younger than David, maybe around 30, tall but not huge, with messy hair and a few days of stubble. He was wearing sweatpants and a tank top, no socks, no shoes, just bare feet on the hallway floor. He smiled like we knew each other and stuck both hands out toward the clothes. "Oh, dry cleaning. Perfect. I will take it," he said. It is not strange for a spouse or roommate to open the door, but after 3 years on the same route, you get a feel for who belongs where. I had never seen this guy, not at the door, not through a window, not even walking out to get the mail. I asked, "Is David home?" "Yeah, he is still sleeping. I will take it myself," the man said. He answered so quickly it sounded rehearsed, and he did not even glance back into the house when he said it. On the surface, it still made sense. Maybe he was a brother staying over or a new roommate, and honestly, it was not my business. My job is to hand over clean clothes, take the dirty ones, and get to the next address. So I gave him the bag with David's clean things. He took it, turned his shoulders so he filled most of the doorway, said, "Thanks," and stepped back inside. The next morning, Wednesday, my route put me back in that same neighborhood. Even when a customer skips a pickup, I usually swing by their place the next day in case they forgot to put the bag out. David was one of those customers, so I parked in the same spot and walked up his path again with empty hands. There was no bag on the step and no note taped to the door. I was lifting my hand to knock when the handle turned and the door opened again. The same man from the day before stood there, this time in jeans and a plain t-shirt, still barefoot. He said, "No items for cleaning today," and closed the door. I drove off that Wednesday, but the stop at David's place stayed in my head. Usually I forget a house as soon as I pull away, but I kept seeing that barefoot guy at his door. No extra car in his driveway, no mention of a roommate, and I remembered him saying he liked living alone so he could work in peace. I told myself it was nothing and finished my route. On Friday morning, my manager called between stops, so I pulled over. She asked, "Did you pick up or drop off for David this week?" I told her I had dropped his clean order on Tuesday, but he never gave me a dirty bag, and Wednesday there was nothing out. She said David had called, saying he had not gotten clean items in weeks. I told her, "I have been delivering. Some guy has been taking the clothes at the door." I described a younger man I had seen twice, messy hair, unshaven, casual clothes, barefoot. She went quiet and put me on hold to speak with David herself. When she came back, her voice was tight. "He says he lives alone, no guests, and he has no idea who you are talking about. He also says he has not seen you in weeks. Some other guy has been opening the door, so he thought we changed drivers." I just stared at the dashboard and told her I had been on that route the whole time. We both realized this was not a simple mistake and that someone else had access to his house. She told me to meet her at David's place in an hour so we could sort it out together. I agreed right away, because after that call I really did not want to walk up to that door alone. An hour later we parked near his driveway, walked up the path, and rang the bell together. The man who opened the door was the same David I remembered from months of deliveries. He looked confused seeing both of us standing there. My manager introduced herself, then me, and I said I was the driver who usually came there. David frowned and said he had not seen me for a while, only the new guy. I told him I had never left the route, and again went over what the other man looked like. Younger, unshaven, casual clothes, always barefoot on the hallway floor. As I talked, David went pale and said he thought he knew who that might be. He told us that for weeks he had noticed food missing from the fridge, cups left out, and a few shirts gone from his closet. One night he even heard footsteps downstairs while he was in his office, checked the rooms, found nothing, and blamed stress and lack of sleep. My manager asked if anyone else had a key, maybe an ex, a friend, or a landlord, and he shook his head. He said, "Just me. I have been here alone for years." Then he said if someone had been in his house he wanted to know right now and that we should check. He led us through the first floor, opening closet doors and glancing under tables, but everything looked normal. Then he opened the basement door off the kitchen, switched on the light, and we went down the stairs one by one. In the far corner, behind a stack of boxes, he stopped, moved one box aside, and we saw an old mattress on the concrete, a blanket, and plastic bags of food. About 20 years ago now, actually last August, I took a job house sitting at a country yacht club on the outskirts of Seattle. I was 30, a freelance photographer between longer contracts, and I'd been quietly freaking out about money and work for a while. The club belonged to a wealthy family who'd hired me before to shoot birthdays and charity parties, so when they said they were going to Europe for 3 weeks and needed someone to live on site and keep an eye on things, it sounded like an easy yes. Off-season, the club was closed, no guests, just me on the property, good pay, and free housing. My cottage was the old caretaker's place on a low hill above the docks. 1 bedroom, tiny kitchen, a desk they'd dragged in for me. From the sink window, I could see the whole layout. The big main building with the restaurant and conference rooms, the long dock with the boats pulled out of service and tied under covers, a line of squat utility sheds, and the gravel drive down to the gate. The owners walked me through everything the day before they left, handed over a big ring of keys and a list of phone numbers, and repeated twice that nobody was expected on the property. "If someone shows up, call us or the police. Don't try to deal with it yourself," the husband said. At the time, it felt like they were being dramatic. The first week was quiet. Mornings, I'd unlock the main building, walk through the empty restaurant and offices, grab any mail from the small front desk, then set up my laptop in a conference room and edit old shoots. Around sunset, I'd walk along the water by the dock just to get away from my screen. There were no neighboring houses in sight, just trees and the faint sound of the road. So by the 3rd or 4th night, I'd stopped noticing how alone I actually was. Little things stood out even before anything obvious happened. I noticed a plastic chair on the restaurant's back deck sitting a little off from where I remembered it, and another morning the chain on the front gate was looped through a different link. I told myself it was wind, or that the groundskeeper had done something before he left, and I just hadn't registered it. When you spend all day alone, you start second-guessing your own memory, so I let it go. On the 8th day, coming back from my walk around 6 in the evening, I saw that the main building's front door was slightly open. It wasn't hanging wide, just enough that the latch hadn't caught. I was sure I'd locked it that morning and tried the handle, because I always did. For a minute, I stood there listening for any kind of noise inside, then felt ridiculous and went up the steps. I nudged the door with my hand and it swung in. The lobby was dim but empty. I hit the main light switch, called out once, and walked through the first floor. Restaurant, bar, kitchen, little office. Nothing looked moved. I decided the lock must not have seated right, and a gust of wind had done the rest. Locked the door again, pulled on it twice to be certain, circled the building once, and then went back to the cottage to edit photos. The next morning, I went back to the main building to check the mail like usual. As soon as I reached the top of the stairs to the 2nd floor, I smelled cigarette smoke in the corridor. Faint, but fresh. I don't smoke. The owners don't smoke. And I knew the building had been closed up for days. The windows barely opened, so it didn't feel like something drifting in from outside. Halfway down the hall, I saw that one of the conference room doors was open. I was sure I'd left them all closed. Inside, on the table near the head chair, someone had ground out a cigarette and left it there next to a half-empty plastic water bottle. When I held my hand over the ash, I could still feel a bit of heat. Whoever it was had only just left. I backed out without touching anything, locked the front door, and called the owners from outside. It was midnight in Paris, but they picked up right away. I told them about the open door, the smoke, the butt and bottle. The husband went quiet, then said he'd phone the local police and told me to get back to the caretaker's cottage, lock myself in, and stay away from the buildings until officers arrived. Those 40 minutes felt longer than the whole first week. I paced between the window and the door with my phone in my hand, watching the gravel drive and replaying the smell of smoke in my head, wondering if someone was still on the property watching me back. When the patrol car finally pulled in, 2 officers got out and waved up at the cottage before heading straight to the main building. They called me to confirm where I'd found everything, then did a slow, methodical search. First the restaurant and offices, then the utility sheds, then the boat hangar down by the dock. They didn't find anyone. On their second pass through the main building, they went deeper into the storage rooms on the second floor, moving old boxes and stacks of faded life jackets. And that's where they found it. A rolled-up sleeping bag wedged behind the jackets, several empty cans, and a cheap flashlight. Someone had been sleeping there for at least a few nights, right above the empty restaurant I kept walking through like it was mine. The officers said it was probably a homeless person who'd found their way onto the grounds off-season and decided the place was safer than the street. They installed a better lock on the main entrance and advised me to call if I saw anything suspicious. The next 2 days were quiet, and I tried to convince myself the guy was gone for good and that the police and the new lock had scared him off. I worked, answered emails, and kept doing little circuits of the windows, checking the path and the docks like it was just another part of my routine. On the third day around noon, I was at the small table in the cottage sorting photos when I heard the sharp crash of breaking glass from the direction of the main building. I went straight to the window and saw that one of the side windows on the first floor was shattered, glass on the outside gravel, but I couldn't see anyone nearby. My hands started shaking as I called the police again and told the dispatcher someone had broken a window and I was alone on the property. While I waited, I stayed by the cottage window, a little off to the side so I wasn't standing there like a target, and just watched the big building. About 10 minutes later, when it was starting to feel like maybe I had imagined the sound, I saw a shadow pass fast across one of the second-floor windows. It was only a second, just enough to know someone was up there, and I told the dispatcher I'd seen movement inside and they said officers were almost there. The patrol car pulled in about 15 minutes later, and the same 2 officers went straight to the broken window, then inside, then came up to the cottage to tell me to stay put. They searched the main building, the utility sheds, and the boat hangar again, but found no one, and one officer pointed out the broken window faced the forest, so whoever it was had probably run that way when they heard the siren, and that it was almost certainly the same guy trying to get his hideout back. After they left, the quiet felt worse than before, because now I knew he was willing to smash his way in while I was there, not just sneak around when the place was empty. I barely slept that night and kept thinking about how he must have been watching me for days to know when I was relaxed and when I was distracted. By late morning the next day, I decided I couldn't just sit in the cottage waiting, so around 3 in the afternoon, I made a plan to pretend to leave. I packed my camera bag, walked out, slammed the cottage door louder than necessary, got in my car where he could see it, and drove out through the gate like I was done for the day. As soon as I could turn around on the road, I looped back, parked off in the trees by a small dirt track, locked the car, and walked quietly through the woods until I could see the buildings. I crouched in the bushes with my phone and camera ready, watching the side entrance of the main building and trying not to move while I waited. Around 5, I saw a door open and a man with a backpack walk toward my cottage. I zoomed in and took pictures while he tried the locked door, circled the cottage, and peered through my windows. When he started toward the dock, I immediately called the police and gave them his description. They caught him, said he'd been living there for weeks, showed me knife, and after the owners came I left and never did isolated caretaker work again.